And I couldn't even figure out how this be able to put attendees in waiting rooms. Can't do that now.
Okay.
Yeah, put that on you for the meetings.
I was told I wasn't social distance.
You're more than 6 feet.
Yeah,
Good.
more than 6 feet.
Yes.
Good.
She's got that front and center picture.
What's that? No.
Oh, that's.
Yeah, you gotta change that.
How,
I like that.
is that the gallery?
It's, yeah, you're on speaker view, so go to the other one. Otherwise, whoever speaks is gonna pop up in the middle.
Oh, I thought that was a dot one.
Target. Okay.
You fit it with that little box.
Review.
There we go.
Over here somewhere. If we want to go.
I'll try to review the
So we don't have, so click that office speaker view right here. Gallery.
I think now it's gallery.
You're in gallery.
Yeah, so, and then you. I know. I would like Corey to maybe, if we go back to having just the agenda up on one computer and not have her hooked up into this, it might be easier for her.
Work that for the next meeting.
Yeah.
Got the agenda.
Yeah, I've got the agenda.
Okay. And you'll be able to click on the. Awesome. Okay. So we need 2 screens.
Yes, two
Two
screens would be
operators,
nice,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so if we have, like, it set up normally and have me run that, and then Barbara be separate.
Right.
That way then we could have the screens just showing the agenda like normal.
We,
Because otherwise there's just way too much on the screen for her.
yeah. You only have that one little screen. If we get 2 screens, you can put stuff on this side.
But you tried it, but.
A lot of attended. Time. Lost the clock. Minutes 6:59.
you, Mr. Roberts.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to our May 11th Town Council meeting. For those of you joining in from home, I would ask if you're calling in on your phone, it's *6 to mute and unmute, and *9 will allow us to recognize if you have to ask a question or something. If you're on video, you should be able to click the hand button in order to get our attention for questions at the time. If we could all stand for a pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence for our men and women of the service, serving in harm's way.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands
What you
one nation under God,
under God, indivisible, with
with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. We will get started with the roll call. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Jukusa?
Present.
Ms. Abbott?
Present.
Mr. Hamilton?
Present.
Mr. Katzman?
Present.
Kelly?
Present.
Dr. Ryan?
Here,
Mr. Aguilar?
Present. Thank you all. Okay, President's executive summary. We had some technical difficulties tonight, so we were planning to have executive session. Executive session will now occur at the conclusion of our regular session tonight. I have no further updates from the President. The next item that we have is our consent agenda.
move to
President
receive and place
Keith
in
Hamilton.
file.
Well, that'd be Mr. Ryan. I'll second that. It's a move to accept as presented, Dr. Ryan.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we will convene as the Board of License Commissioners. The first item is a request approval for a temporary seasonal expansion of service area for Locals Inc., 657 Park Ave, to allow food and alcohol service in an outside dining area from May 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020. We have,
Keith Hamilton. Move to approve.
yes, Mr. Hamilton.
Move to approve.
Do we have a second?
Linda Ujifuza, I second for discussion.
Okay. Yeah, we're just waiting for the thing to come up. Go ahead, Ms. Ujifuza.
Yeah, so I want to be clear about what we're approving, only because just today, and it's always a moving target, Governor Raimondo gave some instructions about restaurants, and I just want to make sure that whatever we approve comports with the requirements she set forth. And that should, and I guess so that's one thing. And then a question I have is, should the requirements change, what are the procedures for us being able to make sure that our approval follows the changes that are being dictated at the state level?
Okay, I just want to, I think I just want to clarify something first. And all good points, Ms. Ujifuza. I think the outdoor seating that they're asking for would be their annual outdoor seating under non-COVID situation. If this were to be approved, any outdoor seating that they would be normally allowed would now have to conform to whatever the social distancing protocols would be. So maybe they'd only have half as many tables in accordance with the governor's new recommendations, spaced apart. But I mean, for this situation here, I think they're looking at this as if under normal operating, a normal operating situation.
Yes, that's correct.
So I would agree that any approvals, if this were to be approved, would then have to conform to whatever current social distancing outdoor policies are going to be in place for outdoor restaurants.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to other counselors as well.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions, or, I mean, it's hard to, can we just have it, I guess, up a little so we can see what the text is? I can't access it, so I'm looking at the same screen. So, nope, I'm sorry. I was just trying to see the picture of, so that their outdoor seating would be up to 60 to 80 guests at those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 tables under normal situation. Yeah.
Yeah, and when the indoor dining rule goes into effect, the rule is that the tables would have to be no closer than 8 feet or separated by a barrier, and no parties greater than 5. So that would, of course, dictate how they could use this outdoor dining. What they're doing here is they're just asking for their annual permission.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Are there any?
I'd like to have a discussion after we approve this, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, we have a question. I think I see a hand up, at least from the audience. Can we? She's okay. On the phone or from home, we have I believe it's Michelle Arsal. Can you just state your name and address for the secretary, clerk?
The address of the restaurant or my address? It's Michelle
Your
Arsenal.
name and your home address.
I'm sorry.
And
My
your
home address is 50 Caribou Way, Tiverton, Rhode Island.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, I just wanted to say this is exactly what you were saying, like just for the temporary opening of the thing, we are fully aware that we are going to comply to all the rules and regulations of this COVID thing. And we are prepared to do that.
Okay.
That was it.
Okay, no, thank you very much. And I appreciate it. I just wanted to make sure we were all seeing the same thing. I don't see any other questions, hands up. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar?
Aye. The motion passes 7-0. Mr. Hamilton, you had a comment?
Mr. President? Yeah,
Yes.
before we leave this, obviously with our new, I hate to call it the new normal of outside restaurants and seating, and I guess this is a question to the solicitor, is there a way that we could make the approval of these subject to council approval afterwards, that these guys, that the restaurants could get up and running sooner than our next meeting, which is after the Memorial Day weekend, if the governor is, as was laid out today, is planning on relaxing the guidelines for outdoor dining come May 18th. If other restaurants that don't have permanent outdoor seating would be able to expand, like I'll just bring up Fieldstones doesn't have an permanent outside seating area, neither does Trembley's has 3 seats out front, but is there something that we could do?
And it's ongoing, right? It's actually ongoing and quite detailed review and analysis, trying to figure out an appropriate measures to take to follow the governor's directive and make it as easy as possible for our businesses to be able to have outdoor opening as the next phase continues. I think Rich can probably elaborate on that, but that's something that's being actively worked on right now, and probably something will be coming to the council for approval at the next meeting, I would assume.
My concern with the next meeting is that it's after the Memorial Day weekend when, sorry, Mr. President, go ahead.
We could have a special meeting too.
I think we're having some difficulties with the speakers because everybody's cutting in and out. So we're hearing partial statements. I don't know if are you getting the same feedback at home?
Oh, yes.
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 Yeah, I don't know what's causing it. I don't know if it's internet connection, but for some reason our audio tonight seems very choppy. I definitely apologize to those who are listening home and calling in on the phone. I just want to summarize. Mr. Gavin, you mentioned that there's already a process that's being reviewed. I would be in favor of, if there are restaurants that are looking to entertain outside in order to allow them to reopen in some capacity. I would be in favor of giving them permission, provided that they at least notify us. Somebody at the town has to at least be aware, Mr. Rayner or building official. Somebody has to be aware of what they're doing.
Yeah, let me just interject. This really isn't on the agenda, but it's being actively worked on, and based on what the council has said, I think it may be advisable, a good idea for when the town administrator has a plan, maybe to call a special meeting, 48 hours notice to get, rather than wait till the next regular council meeting. But again, Rich may want to weigh in, but it's an active subject of ongoing discussion.
So then,
Mr.
what
President.
we should do is, yes.
No, I believe Governor Raimondo just today announced that she was going to issue expedited process for having restaurants be able to do this tomorrow or the next day. So it makes sense to wait to see what she says and allow the staff to come up with our plan and then have a special meeting to approve it.
I agree. I think we're all thinking the same thing and looking for a way to help our businesses. So let's give it another day or so. But I do think that if we can stay ahead of this and so that we don't miss out on that holiday weekend, for hopefully the weather will be nice, but at least we can offer some additional support to our local businesses. I think that would go a long way. So we'll give it another day or two, and then if we, need to have a special meeting, I think we can make that happen. So thank you for that, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Jukusa and Mr. Gavin. All good comments.
Motion to adjourn as the Board of License Commissioners.
Seconded.
We have a motion in a second. I think it's Dr. Ryan.
So Mr. Hamilton
Yeah.
and Dr. Ryan,
All those
Yes.
in favor?
Ms. Jukusa,
Aye.
Ms. Abbott,
Aye.
Mr. Katzman,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Dr. Ryan,
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre.
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton's an aye, too.
Mr. Hamilton, just automatically went over you.
Story of my life.
Yep.
All right, next we have, so the motion passed 7-0 with the late addition of Mr. Ham.
Yep.
Next we have minutes of our April 20th, along with our executive, minutes from our April 22nd, April 21st, April 22nd, and April 23rd. Those were our budget meetings.
This is Mark Ryan. Move to approve as submitted.
Keith Hamilton, second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa,
Aye.
Ms. Abbott,
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton,
Aye.
Mr. Katzman,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Dr. Ryan,
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre.
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. On to tax vouchers. We have request approval for tax vouchers 2020-0511-01 to 2020-0511-02.
Keith Hamilton, move to approve as presented.
Len
Seconded.
Katzman, second.
Motion in a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa,
Aye.
Ms. Abbott,
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton,
Aye.
Mr. Katzman,
Aye.
Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Dr. Ryan,
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre.
Aye. The motion passes 7-0. Next, we have the town administrator's report. Mr. Rain.
Good evening, Mr. President, Town Council, and people listening in. The Rhode Island DEM has announced the municipalities to be awarded recreation grants. Portsmouth's application for a grant to replace the Mount Pope seawall was granted $54,000. DEM Director Janet Coy, although recognizing the value of the seawall project and made the award, however, granted less than what we applied for, about a little less than half of what we applied for. So therefore, DEM will soon start working with us so that we can work out how the town can incorporate the reduced funding into the projected scope of work. Next, we were notified last week that the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank's application to the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration for assistance with the assessment of the Navy infrastructure inventory along the Defense Highway Corridor was approved. The total cost of the project is projected to be $600,000. The EDA will provide $300,000, and it will be matched by $300,000 from the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. With respect to the Portsmouth High School graduation, unfortunately, the high school graduation ceremony cannot be held in its current traditional format due to the measures and executive orders that have been put in place in response to our pandemic. Town departments have partnered with a graduation steering committee put together by the school administration to support an alternative event. The plan is being worked out, and we will disseminate that plan to the high school students and parents as those details are fully developed and vetted by the committee. With respect to the COVID-19 update, phase one of the reopening of Rhode Island and our economy has started. There is an incredible amount of information to absorb and stay ahead of, and I encourage people to regularly visit the town's website and review the COVID-19 information which is posted. This information is easily accessed by clicking on the links located at the banner at the top of our website. I again want to say thank you to all of our residents, businesses, and community partners. I know the current measures that we live under are having a significant impact on quality of life. Some specific guidance and requirements I'd like to emphasize. Cloth face masks are now mandatory in all indoor and outdoor public places. Social distancing requirements remain in place. Non-critical retail establishments can now reopen under new guidelines. As we discussed earlier, dining in at restaurants is still prohibited, but dining out, outside dining will begin May 18th. State parks have begun to reopen. Reopening of state beaches is anticipated in the second phase of the reopening plan. Portsmouth parks and beaches are currently open as long as patrons adhere to current executive orders and guidelines. However, Portsmouth playgrounds and the dog park remain closed. Another program I'd like to emphasize in this report is the Micro Enterprise Stabilization Program, the Micro-E program. The Rhode Island Office of Housing and Community Development and the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development is offering working capital grants under the Community Development Block Grant Program to qualifying small businesses or micro enterprises, which have been adversely impacted by COVID-19. A micro enterprise is defined as a commercial enterprise that has 5 or fewer employees, one or more of whom owns the enterprise. Grants will be made for up to $5,000 that can be used for working capital to cover business costs such as rent, staffing, and utilities. Specific information, including restrictions and criteria, can be found at our website or by contacting the town's Director of Business Development, Rich Talipsky. All this information is available in the Portsmouth-specific coronavirus information section of our website. And again, thank you to everybody for supporting and cooperating with the measures put in place during this unprecedented time. Additionally, I do want to bring up 2 more things. I'd just like to emphasize again that we are requesting nominations for the Portsmouth Award throughout this month. We will be accepting those award nominations. That information can be found under the news and announcements section of the front page of our website, and we will accept nominations through May 29th. And then lastly, together with the administrators in Middletown and Newport, we are forming a municipal response team with the staff of Connect Greater Newport and a broader group of regional stakeholders that will allow us to provide different levels of response to area businesses as needed to address the negative impacts of COVID-19 on their business. Beginning next week, Connect Greater Newport is preparing to distribute an initial survey that will allow us to better understand how our businesses are responding to this crisis. Follow-up surveys will be sent out on a regular periodic basis, so we will be able to gauge how businesses are doing in their recovery as we move through this pandemic. More information is available at the COVID information page on our website. Thank you, Mr. President. That's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Okay. Next, we have removals, resignations, and appointments. The first item was a removal for the Prudence Island Planning Commission. There was a request to table this motion. So if I could have a motion to table this until such time.
Keith Hamilton, so moved. To
Like
table
that, I move
the
table.
removal and also the appointment.
Second. Len Katzman.
Linda,
second.
would you please a second?
We have this audio. So we have a motion and a second, doubled up. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan? And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we have appointments for the Housing Authority. It's is it John Richmond?
Mr. President, in looking at this one, it seems a little bit odd to me that we would have essentially the lien and mortgage holder of the Housing Authority on the board of the Housing Authority. That seems a little bit too close to the gray area of ethics to me here in Rhode Island.
Very good point there, Mr. Hamilton. Any concerns from other counselors?
I appreciate the fact that he wants to step up and be on the board, but it just doesn't seem right to me. So if there is a motion, I would vote negative. So I'll make a motion that we deny and thank the applicant, but deny the application because of it's just too close to the gray areas of ethics to me.
Mr.
Len
Chair, could I?
Katzman,
Go ahead.
if I could,
Go ahead, Mr. Kaplan.
yeah, the applicant is a senior member of the branch. He's a vice president, where he's directly involved in regulatory mortgage accounts. And because the bank is the mortgage holder, if he were to be appointed, he would have to recuse himself from anything that might in some way interrelate to the relationship with his employer, which may be too many matters. So I concur that the applicant has his heart in the right place, no doubt. But I think we should pass on this one.
Ms. Jukusa, you got a question? Huh?
I was going to amend the motion to just look into this a bit more. I'm not sure I have enough information, but if my colleagues are more certain about it, I could be persuaded.
Okay.
I mean, if you wanted to table it and send it to the Ethics Commission to get their read on it, that's fine as well. It just, it's a little bit too close for me.
And I would
Right.
support the council members. I'd support the council members' urge to table and look into it further.
Okay, that would be my amendment to the original motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to amend the motion.
Well, we didn't really get a second on Mr.
Correct.
Okay.
So
So I will just make a new motion to table this item and forward it to the Ethics Commission for review.
Second.
Can I just interject here?
Sure.
I don't doubt that the Ethics Commission would entertain a letter from Portsmouth asking for an advisory opinion. I think it would have to come from the individual who applied for the appointment. So I would take that out of the motion and just maybe communicate through the administration, communicate back with the Housing Authority and with the applicant and, point out the council's concerns. But I don't think the Ethics Commission would entertain the request for an advisory opinion from the town.
Okay.
So just table it for further review, and then we can get back to the applicant and the authority as to what the concerns that were expressed tonight. That would be my recommendation.
That seems more fair. So we would have a motion back to the table it.
And then the individual could, if he wants to, seek an advisory opinion from the Ethics Commission, but that would be up to him to see.
He could do that or he could withdraw. So,
Right.
Okay. So we have a motion to table. Do we have a second? Ms. Jukusa? Okay.
Yes, second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
You're muted, Dr. Ryan.
Sorry about that. Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. We were reading lips, but doesn't count. Next, we have appointments to the Melville Park Committee for Mr. Stephen Lucy.
Loose.
Loose.
Mr. Hamilton, move to approve.
Mr. Ryan, second.
All those in favor?
Mrs. Jukusa?
Aye.
Mrs. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. And on to the appointments for the Solid Waste and Recycling Committee. We have an appointment for Mr. Jason Powell.
Spitalik. Linda Jukusa, I move that he be approved.
Keith
Mark
Hamilton,
Ryan,
second.
second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Mrs. Jukusa?
Aye.
Mrs. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Okay, on to old business. Item under old business is receive, discuss, and determine next steps for the working draft of the complete streets ordinance. Mr. Crosby. I thought I saw
Participants?
it.
There he is.
You got it.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
There you are, Mr. We got you.
There we go.
Yes,
So,
we can hear you.
thank you. So what I have for you is a draft of a complete streets ordinance. The original resolution stated that the planning department is to work with local and regional resources to draft clean and complete streets ordinances. I have done so. I used in order to do it. So the bulk of the guidance that I've received about this matter says that that municipalities wanting to approach this subject should consider drafting complete streets policies first, rather than complete streets ordinances. Ordinances require, they use the words shall and must and so forth, and require things to be happening. And so I drafted a complete streets ordinance. I used the references that I consulted were chapter 2016 of Rhode Island General Laws, Rhode Island Complete Streets Action Plan, a model from the National Policy and Legal Analysis Network, National Complete Goal Coalition Workbook, Smart Growth America, and the best of 2008 policies regarding this, and ordinances from the city of Shoreline, Washington, Central Falls, Mass., Brockton, Mass., Ocean Shores, Washington, Albany, New York, and Somerville, Mass. To craft this ordinance. And so I have it before you in order for you to determine next steps.
We have comments from counselors.
Sure.
I'll go first. First of all, I want to say, Gary, thank you. This is a great first draft, I think. You know, I hear your point about a policy versus an ordinance. However, policies don't have much in terms of teeth for enforcement. So if we could continue working with the ordinance, and you know, you have plenty of exclusions in here that I think, you know, we can kind of cover ourselves, so we're not boxing ourselves into any very strict requirements. I mean, I have specific comments on specific wording in the ordinance, but I don't think this is necessarily the venue for this. Can we have a workshop or something of that nature? Because I know there's a lot of people in town interested in participating in the development of this ordinance. I don't know what mechanisms we have to be able to do that. And then, so I mean, that's what I would like to see happen with the ordinance itself. I know there's other municipalities that currently have committees working on developing their ordinance. So this is a fantastic starting point. If we could convene an ad hoc committee, or I don't know, whatever kind of committee to work on this and gather input from the public with regards to, you know, the wording and the priorities and the objectives of this ordinance. I think that would be, I'd be interested in entertaining that.
Mr. Gaffney? Question? Oh.
Okay, yes. First, I want to thank Mr. Crosby. I also want to thank Councilmember Abbott for championing and spearheading this undertaking. I actually think that's a great idea, to have a workshop to get to socialize the text a little bit and get some public input. I'm also interested in knowing if, before we adopt an ordinance like this, or as we move towards adopting an ordinance like this, we wouldn't benefit from input from a review by the planning board, or maybe does the zoning board of review typically review these kinds of things, Mr. President?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Gavin, but I think it's a great idea to have the planning board take a look at it to see how it fits with our current ordinances with respect to development within the town. Because any potential development and stuff would fall under this ordinance. So I think it would, it would be helpful for the planning board to review it. The planning board would also have a public meeting, so there's another additional opportunity there for some public input. Now, whether we do that first or after a workshop, I mean, I think that's something that you know, the council can weigh in on. But maybe it might be helpful to at least get it over to the planning board and see what that initial round of public comments might be. That's just my thought. I don't know.
Yeah, Mr. President, if I could just conclude my remarks, I think parallel tracks. I think we don't need to wait for the planning board to go to the public to start to get input on that, but I'd defer to Ms. Abbott.
Well, a couple comments. I think when we made the original motion to work on this ordinance, one of the items included was that we may consider an addendum to our comprehensive plan. I think the planning board is currently in the last phases of approving the comprehensive plan, and I think there are a lot of elements in here that could probably be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. So I don't know if we want to bring it to the planning board now, but I think when we updated the comp plan, again, as an example, we had a committee put together their comments first before it went to the planning board, but it doesn't really matter the order. Everybody's going to probably have some input at some point before we pass anything like this. So if we can work on them in parallel tracks, I think that would be great, but I think it's important to get comments from the public who have a lot of,
Sure.
Who are mostly impacted about this. So I don't know what our options are for that, but and we're in the middle of a pandemic who knows when it's going to end. So I don't know if we want to wait until we can have workshops in person or try to have virtual workshops. So I don't really know what the best options are going forward, but some kind of public workshop I think would be the ideal next step for me. And then I'll just, yes, Mr. Evans, sorry.
I'm not sure where it's leading, but I think the idea of a workshop first before involving the planning board would probably be the better course of action, because they are going to be, there's going to be a hearing on the comp plan, which will then come to the council. The council could, raise issues during that process. And then also when the council has a workshop with citizens and can, decide where you want to go with this. But to send it to the planning board open-ended right now, I think it might just kind of cause a lot of confusion and not be productive, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And since I introduced the original motion, I have had several members of the public reach out to me to ask, how can I help? How can I participate? So I think if we could just do a broad outreach effort, I will just look to guidance from all of you as to how that is usually done, because I don't know.
Yeah. If I may.
Yeah, Mr. Kaplan, go ahead.
So how that's usually done is we would ask the administration, Gary, to schedule and make an announcement and have a public workshop meeting. I'm with you, though, that I don't know how functional that would be until we can have an in-person meeting. It may be worth trying to have an online meeting, and then we can get feedback and decide if that was enough.
Yeah, I think it would be good to try to have an online meeting and see how good participation is. We can always try to do it again. These days kids are doing school online, we're doing this online, and who knows when we'll be allowed to meet in person. So I would be inclined to do that. Should I make a motion to that effect, or?
At this point, Mr. Crosby is looking for some direction, so I think that might be the appropriate course of action is to.
I make a motion that we schedule a virtual workshop to gather public input regarding the draft Complete Streets Ordinance.
I'll second that.
Second for discussion. I think, Mr. Crosby, did you have a comment or?
No, I don't. It was my job to get words on paper, and it's your job to guide the process forward. So.
Okay. All right. I saw the yellow box, so I didn't know if you had it. All right. So we have a motion and a second to establish a virtual workshop on the draft Complete Streets Ordinance. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Sorry. Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. The motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Next item.
Actually, is that the end of the discussion, or can I add?
What do you want to add? Go ahead.
Well, no, that was the first point, but I think what and I can save my comments for when we have the workshop and can talk about it in person. But I think an important thing to keep in mind as a next step also is that as our planning department and counselors prepare to participate in the workshop, is to think about how we're going to prioritize and identify projects that would be a good idea to pursue, to incorporate into our capital improvement plan, and prioritize important places where we think Complete Streets is most applicable. Like Mr. Aguirre, you said every development will be subject to this, more or less, right? Because Complete Streets, there's different levels of design that are applicable to different uses for roads based on the traffic count and all that. So I think we could, we can pretty easily go down a list of all the roads that the town maintains and identify like the top. I have a list of 8 already that I made that are major roads that the town maintains that could really benefit from some complete streets improvements. So that might not be take place in the workshop, but I think that's going to be the critical next step for us as a town to take on. And so I think that is where the discussion will have to go, as we take the next steps. But I will table that discussion for now. But since Mr. Crosby is looking for guidance from us, I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, no, all good points, and I think moving forward, our priority would be initially to get the ordinance in place, and then follow up exactly with looking at our CIP projects. But hopefully we'll be able to gain some momentum with the virtual meeting, getting word out there, getting some feedback on the ordinance, and go from there. So we've got the ball rolling. Let's see if we can get this thing finalized. So thank you.
Sounds good.
Was there any more comments? There's no comments from. No. Okay. On to the next item under old business. It's proposed changes and revised provisional budget approval of the town of
Workshop, buddy, we're workshop. It's a workshop.
Since Mr. Crosby's looking for guidance from us.
Hold on. You. Okay.
Mr. President, at the last meeting, I reported to you that the Glen Manor House Authority will be working with me to revise the revenue projections for Glen Manor House operations in light of increased event cancellations. It was agreed that I would incorporate the changes and make recommended revisions to the town council provisional budget. Considering the changes made since our last meeting, we have made the following recommended revisions to the budget. So if you can scroll to page 7. There's no vote required on this yet. We'll get to all that. Here you see my budget message. So based on anticipated decreases in Glen Manor House revenue, decreased finance expenditures, and decreased school appropriation and school capital allocations, I am revising the proposed expenditures down to $66,607,971 from the general fund, which is a 2.67% increase over last year. This is reflected in the executive summary on page 9. Again, there's no vote required on this. If we can turn to page 31. You're a little faster than you were last time. So here on page 31, you can see the revision in projected Glen Manor House revenue. We have revised the town's allocation of projected Glen Manor House revenue from $265,031 to $107,494. Additionally, the original revenue summary did not include $40,000 that the town receives for the school resource officer positions. This has been corrected and is reflected here. So you see the highlight 107,494, and immediately below that you see $40,000. These changes result in a reduced projection of revenue and other revenue from $489,971 to $371,534. So we are asking for new provisional approval of $371,534 for rental, investment, and other revenue.
Keith Hamilton, so moved.
Len Katzman, second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. The motion passes 7-0.
If you go back to now page 11. Okay, so here, because of the changes that you just authorized, the revenue summary will need to be changed. So page 11, your approval changes the total projected revenue. We are asking for new provisional approval of $66,607,971 in projected revenue.
Keith Hamilton, so moved.
Mark
Len
Ryan,
Katzman.
seconded.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
You can scroll to page 31, please.
32. 32.
Okay, so some changes were made in the expenditures of the budget so that we can balance it. Since our last meeting, and here on page 41, you see the expenditures, operational expenditures for finance department. Since our last meeting, the auditing firm bid packages have been open and reviewed. The anticipated contract price for auditing services is lower than expected, and we have revised the auditing line from $26,075 to $22,000. This reduces the proposed finance expenditures from $813,064 to $808,989. We are asking for new provisional approval of $808,989 for finance expenditures.
Len
Mark.
Katzman, so moved.
Mark Ryan, seconded.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
So if we scroll down through page 42. Just scroll it back. Okay, there you have the beginning of human resources. There were no change to that first page. But when we get into the next page, page 43, you'll see an addition of health savings account retirees. We've added that line to the HR budget for retiree health savings accounts. This line was originally in the fire department operating budget and is more appropriately reflected in the HR budget. This change is administrative and does not affect the overall budget because this line will be deleted from the fire budget. This change will revise the HR budget from $2,091,731 to $2,137,231. We're therefore asking for new provisional approval of $2,137,231 for HR expenditures.
Keith Hamilton, so moved.
Mark Ryan, seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Now, if we can scroll to the department, the fire department, beginning on page 60. Here's the first page of the fire department budget. And you will see that the overtime personnel shortage line has been increased. The reduction in overall expenditures reflected in this revised budget have allowed us to make a recommended change to firefighter overtime that more closely reflects anticipated overtime costs due to COVID. We have therefore changed the firefighting overtime from $517,000 to $570,000. And additionally, on the next page, page 61, there you go. So additionally, on the next page, on page 61, you can see where we have zeroed out the retiree health savings account line due to moving this expenditure to the HR budget. Overall, these revisions will change the fire budget from $6,915,581 to, go to the next page, where we have the total at the bottom, to $6,923,081. We are therefore asking for new provisional approval of $6,923,081 for fire expenditures.
Mark
Keith
Ryan, so
Hamilton.
moved.
Keith Hamilton, second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzen?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Now, if you'll scroll to page 76. Page 76 begins the school budget. On pages 76 and 77, you will see revised recommendations for our local appropriation to the school and our appropriation for school capital. I have worked this through the school superintendent and the finance director at the school department. The recommended local appropriation has been revised from $34,675,876 to $34,570,876. The recommended appropriation for school capital has been revised from $514,000 to $421,874. What did I say? $75, sorry about that. So we are asking for a new provisional approval of $34,992,000.
Nope.
Where am I?
But I think we have to start with the local appropriation first.
We'll do that. I did total, so you're probably correct. So we are asking for new provisional approval of the local appropriation to the school department from the town of $34,570,876.
Keith Hamilton, so moved.
Mark Ryan, seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Katzen?
I thought we were going to have discussion. I'm fine with just voting aye. I note that the school department, there are members of the school department and school committee chair present at the meeting. I don't know if they want to speak.
Right. Well, I give an opportunity to speak, but I mean, I believe Mr. Rayner said you've already gone through this with the school department, so they should be aware. I mean, I agree, we'll take their comments, but they should be aware of these changes.
So, aye.
We're vetted through the school superintendent and the finance director.
All right, thank you. Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
I think he said aye.
Okay. Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye.
We are also asking for new provisional approval of an allocation of school capital from the town of $421,875.
Mark Ryan, so moved.
Keith Hamilton, second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
So adding those two together, we're asking for provisional approval of $34,992,751 is the total town appropriation to the school.
Keith Hamilton, so moved.
Mark Ryan, seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. So motion passes 7-0.
Now if you'll scroll to the next page. So here, almost 2/3 of the way down, you'll see total town appropriation for school department, and then just below that line, you will see total town, federal, and state funding. So we are asking for new provisional approval of $40,961,674 for total town, federal impact aid, and state aid for the school.
Keith
Mark Ryan, so
Hamilton.
moved.
Keith Hamilton, second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Now, at the bottom of that page, page 77, there you go, right there. So at the bottom of page 77, you will see a note that reflects the school department anticipates $1,107,000 in restricted federal grants. I have discussed this following our conversation at the last meeting with the school finance director, and future budgets will incorporate and reflect how this funding is to be expended. For now, we are asking the council to acknowledge and provisionally approve the school department's anticipated receipt of $1,107,000 in restricted federal grants.
Keith Hamilton, so moved.
Mark Ryan, seconded.
Motion in a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
So now if you will scroll to the Glen Manor House Enterprise Fund, page 96. Okay, I apologize, I didn't highlight the changes, but there are a number. So starting on page 96 under revenue, we have changed the house revenue from $575,000 to $335,000. And we have revised other rentals from $40,000 to $25,000, giving a total of $360,000. So we are asking for new provisional approval of $360,000 for anticipated Glen Manor House revenue.
Glenn Katzman, so moved.
Mark Ryan, seconded.
Motion in a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
So staying on that same page where we begin expenses, under management fees, we have revised commissions from $92,925 to $54,000. On the next page, in operations, we have revised heating oil costs from $25,500 to $20,000. Also, those are the changes there. So that brings the new expenditure total to $216,675. And we are asking for new provisional approval of $216,675 for Glen Manor House expenses.
Len Katzman, so moved.
Mark,
Keith Hamilton, second.
Those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
aye.
Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
So with those approvals, this results now in a net surplus of $143,325. Of that, we are asking for new provisional approval of $107,000, $107,494 in allocation to the general fund.
Keith Hamilton, so moved.
Mr. Rayner, what page would we be seeing this on?
Right at the
97.
bottom,
Yeah, page 97, you'll see the
in the
box.
box there.
Thank you. Len Katzman, second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
So now if we will scroll back to page 32. Page 32 begins the expenditure summaries. The expenditure summaries have been updated to reflect the proposed revisions to finance, human resources, and fire. You can see those highlighted on that page. On the next page, page 33, there were no changes. And then if we scroll to page 34, one more page down. On page 34, we have revised the school department local appropriation and school capital. Additionally, we have revised the contingency line from $14,289 to $34,051. We are also proposing the establishment of an open space restricted fund and propose $10,000 to be allocated for this endeavor. The reestablishment of the open space fund is one of the elements that is being proposed in the comprehensive plan. And we anticipate that so far the planning board has given it approval, and I anticipate that that will be popular. So we are asking for new provisional approval of $34,051 for contingency expenditures and provisional approval of $10,000 for a restricted open space fund.
Mark Ryan, so moved.
Len Katzman, second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. 7-0.
Stay on that page. With your approval of the proposed revised changes, we now project total expenditures to be $66,607,971. We ask for new provisional approval of $66,607,971 in total expenditures, which is equal to total projected revenue.
Keith Hamilton, so moved.
Mark Ryan, seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
So you have provisionally approved revenue and expenditures, and we ask that you adopt the provisional budget.
So moved. Keith Hamilton.
Seconded. Mark Ryan seconded.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Capson?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Okay. On to new business.
Mr. President, before we leave there, just a quick question on the next step for the budget, which would be, and I know it's 4 weeks out, but do we have any idea if we're going to be able to have our normal town meeting in person, or are we going to do this online as well?
Yeah, this has been a topic of discussion amongst all cities and towns for weeks, as you can imagine. Quite frankly, I don't anticipate we would be able to do it because if I'm reading the tea leaves, the size of group gatherings will be no more than 10 at that point, or 15 at the most. So I anticipate we're probably going to have to do this virtually.
Based on the past few years and the size of folks, if we could possibly do it both ways, virtually and in person. You know, the way the governor set up her update today, she was I don't know, was it convention center or Veterans Auditorium or something?
Yeah, I caught that. That was very interesting because the size of group gatherings is no more than 5, but yet there was an auditorium with people who were 6 feet spread out. So,
Right, with signs that said, sit here. So if we were able to do something like that, is it possible that we could do it in person?
If we've asked the question, we haven't received a response yet. If we're allowed to do it in the same format that she's done her press conference, then we would ask that we could do the same thing either in the one of the auditoriums, whether it's middle school or high school. I would recommend the high school because I think that's better sound system.
Absolutely, a much better sound system. Plus, it's probably already wired for internet access and a camera.
So we
will work on it.
We'll work on that.
Thank you, sir.
Hopefully get some positive direction. It would be nice. It's lonely here, you know, without all you guys. I miss you guys.
Don't take this the wrong way, Kevin, but you make me sick.
Oh, man. Doctor.
That would force some of us to have to put pants on now.
Too much information was
Information. And we better get on to new business.
Thank you.
All stay seated. We will have a public hearing to consider the proposed amendment to chapter 405 of the zoning ordinance to include a solar ordinance. We did have a advisory opinion from the planning board.
Mr. Chappelle should be.
Yeah, I saw his name earlier.
Yes, there it is.
Is he? Chappelle?
Yep, there he is.
Oh, okay, we got 2 comments, but Mr. Chappelle?
Hello, how are you?
We are doing well.
All right, I'm glad you can hear me. Thanks for having me here tonight. As you know, I'm assuming you want me to go through the ordinance, but as you know, this began really back in September. When we started this ordeal, it was referred to the planning board. I think we had at least 3 meetings with the planning board, revisions, changes, before it finally around the first of the year got to the point where it was ready to send to you. Then between holidays and now here we are in May. So I am trying to get this moved along for people that are interested in it. I have to begin by saying thank you because it really comes to you not as a solar ordinance drafted by my office, but an ordinance with the collaboration of the department, specifically Gary Crosby and Gasiola had a tremendous amount of help at the planning board. They were present for all of the discussions, votes on what the changes that the planning board proposed, made changes and recommendations for themselves. So I think it really comes before you at this point, kind of a collaborative effort. I think you also need to remember how we got here. Portsmouth has a zoning ordinance that doesn't specifically say that solar is allowed. And traditionally, we just had a portion of the ordinance that said whenever something is not specifically listed, we would merely allow the zoning board to draw an analogy. That's the best thing. As you also know, I was involved as legal counsel for a solar farm, which was in Jepson Lane. And the lawyers that argued both for and against it had that very colloquy about what the analogous use. And ultimately, when it went on appeal to our Superior Court, our court said, that's a great discussion on whether it's manufacturing or into a utility. But the truth is, it is only the council that can decide what's allowed in our town. And an ordinance suggests that the zoning board may have power, I find not constitutional and turned over. Since then, there was a couple of solar applications, and basically, I think the world has been put on pause in Portsmouth, saying that until such time as we get an ordinance really entertaining the solar industry that is not only has a couple of petitions waiting to be filed, but also a governor that initiative to get the towns to approve these ordinances. With that, the governor, as you know, is putting out, the state of Rhode Island at least, had put out a model. That model ordinance at all times was referred to in our work, both me personally and with Crosby and Mr. Nicola, but also with the plan. With that, there's really just a few decisions. We can take a lot of time going over every specific, and I'm ready to do that with you. But a lot of this, the application process, the criteria, the decommission, that all comes from the model. What the towns really have to decide is where in my backyard. If I have residential, am I going to allow it? And if I'm going to allow it in residential, what is going to be the process? If I want to allow it by use variance, which is basically says it's not allowed, but under certain circumstances, a petitioner may be able to convince the zoning board that there's no other beneficial use of their property. Is it allowed under special use permit, which is a conditional use, but let's make sure the neighbors are notified. Let's make sure we look at this piece of property as a unique parcel. Tell me what the neighborhood's like. Tell me what the traffic is like. Tell me what the engineering, those types of issues. And let's make a decision whether it can be put there as a conditional use with the proper safeguards. Then you have, your commercial and your industrial areas where it may be allowed as a matter of right. The problem is even though it may be allowed as a matter of right, it just isn't something we want people just to go get a permit for. If it's allowed as a matter of right, we need to make sure that there is a plan, that it's built in accordance with the representations. We need to make sure that there's a 6-foot fence around it for safety of children. We need to make sure there's a decommission plan. We need to make sure it doesn't create surface water runoff problems. So the ordinance addresses all that. And I think to begin, you have to remember that it's not only, the ordinance is really an amendment to what we call Section J or the solar ordinance itself. But whenever you write a portion of a solar ordinance, you find it integrates 3 or 4 times through the rest of the ordinance. So I'd like to begin with Article 5, which is really the table of land uses. And I think the thing that a lot of people are looking for, where is it allowed and under what circumstances? So that's page 1 of 8 of what was handed to you on what I see on the screen. We'll begin with the model ordinance and our ordinance all have different levels. For instance, we have always allowed as an accessory use solar on top of our roof. This ordinance doesn't change that. They are permitted uses if you have a roof, and if you wish to partake in the solar industry, you can still have that done. The ordinance doesn't change that. This ordinance does say that how about the guy who just has a house that doesn't point or doesn't have roof exposure that is to the south or to the east, which is certainly preferred for this type of application. Can he have a small solar system, maybe in his yard? So a small solar system is an accessory use. It is designed to produce electricity for the home or business that's located on the property. And it can only be small. The model ordinance talks about a percentage of the roof, but generally the consensus was that we gave it a square footage of 1,600 square feet. So there happens, there's at least one person in town that has such ordinance in their yard. There's specific rules for those small ordinances. They're very much akin to the zoning ordinance that some of you know well. Lot coverage is a measurement of panels combined with your house, combined with your shed, and there's no addition for additional lot coverage. So in most zones, we're limited to 20% lot coverage. If you have enough yard and can do this in the setbacks, or outside of the setbacks, I'm sorry, so you maintain front yard and rear yard setbacks, then you can have a small solar array servicing just your property. What we're really talking about when we talk about solar ordinance is the larger commercial type of solar fields. And in this particular case, the state had medium and large. There's not much differential within our ordinance. Generally, under the state ordinance, a medium being smaller than a large requires less permitting. In the ordinance proposed before you, a medium and a large have the same amount of permitting. Now, I think it's important to note that the state kind of tells you in your model ordinance, do you want to go to the planning board or do you want to go to the zoning board? And I understand that that's the model ordinance. My ordinance doesn't say go to the planning board or the zoning board. In many cases, it says go to both. As a 35-year practitioner here in town, I believe the zoning board is, in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, tremendously equipped to deal with whether or not this belongs in your neighborhood if you're a residential area. They are the board that is skilled at listening to neighbors. They're the board that's skilled at notifying neighbors. They're the board that's skilled at having a meeting and to compromise between the balance of the neighbors and the balance of the project. So in the residential areas, you'll see in front of you an S. An S means it is not allowed as a matter of right for either a small or medium or large in the R10, R20, R30 districts. As you know, that's residential 10,000 square feet, residential 20,000 square feet, or residential 30,000 square feet. An applicant has to file a petition, notify all neighbors, and basically say, this is a conditional use. Do you think this property at this size proposed with the safeguards proposed make this safe? That's the way it was handled before the change or before our ordinance was stricken down. And that's the way it would be continued to be handled in these residential areas. When you get into commercial areas, light industry areas, heavy industry areas, and the waterfront district, it changes to an M. And the reason it changes to an M is that you don't need to go to the zoning board because these areas by nature are commercial or industrial. And this is a fairly innocuous use that we're going to allow there as a matter of right. M stands for Major Land Development Review, which means it has to go to the planning board. Again, in my experience, the zoning board is the one that decides whether something should be in a neighborhood, and the planning board is the one that decides whether they did it right. They're the ones that look at roads, for instance, in subdivisions. They look at surface water drainage. They look at the underground electrical. They look at the traffic patterns. So everything we want to go to at least major land review. We don't want the inconsistency of a solar farm that's approved in a residential area having less regulations or less scrutiny or more scrutiny than one that's in the major areas and allowed by right. So the planning board will oversee the process to make sure that everything is built in accordance with the plan, with the proper fencing, with the proper vegetation, with the setbacks, very specifically decommission plans, which, as you know, are a plan and a bond and a budget that the developer would have to set so that 20 years from now or sooner, if the field goes out of service, there is a fund to get that can be removed. The land can be restored to its pre-approval state. So the difference is, again, major subdivision for the planning board design review for those plans that are either conditionally approved under special use permit in residential, or for those plans that are originally brought into the planning board under major plan review. And that's the sum and substance of this ordinance. I assure you, we have produced up to 39 towns I think there were 15 or 16 different town ordinances. Some are as easy as in the use tables, just saying solar is permitted by, by a S or a Y or an N, a yes, no, or a special use permit. But most of the new ordinance do in fact follow that model ordinance, and they are very specific on what needs to be approved, what needs to be submitted. They require surveys, they require fire department input, they require police department input. They require all licensing and permits required by the state of Rhode Island to put in this type of deal. They require integration plans into the national grid system. They require decommission plans, surface water runoff plans. And I think overall, it might be a little burdensome to get them approved, but at least now, if you vote on this tonight, they will have the opportunity to go forward and seek those permissions or seek the regulated approvals. Right now, we're in kind of a holding pattern where nobody wants to even accept an application except for a roof-mounted system. So I am certainly ready to answer any questions that you have or the logic on how the wording of this ordinance got put into play. But I do believe it's comprehensive and in accordance with the state mandates and the model ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Chappelle. I know there's some questions from the public, but do we have any questions from counselors at the moment? Mr. Hamilton?
Just one quick one. More a comment than a question. My only concern on the table here is the R40 being permitted, which is essentially an acre of land or a builder's acre. That 16, you said they would be, by right, they would have the right for 1,600 square foot land mounted array?
Well, so the permission on R40 as opposed to R30, remember, we're not talking about the roof mounted because that's allowed everywhere, right?
Correct.
And we're not talking about the medium and large because that still requires a special use permit. The planning board, I believe, under R40 and R60 thought the small system, because it's limited to 1,600 square feet, which again, if I had a 34,000 square foot house, then that would be a roof mounted system. So it's not a huge system. But because by definition, my lot is either 40,000 or 60,000 square feet, and because it had to meet in a small system, remember, has to meet all the setbacks. So if I have a 30-yard front yard, 30-yard rear, and 15-foot sides, none of it could be there. If I have a 40,000 square foot lot and a 20,000 square foot house, I would have already exceeded my 20% lot coverage, and I couldn't do anything. So by definition, if I have 1,600 square feet of available space, I haven't used that in barns, sheds, garages, pools, tennis courts, or the like. So generally that homeowner is electing to use his 20% lot coverage on those large lots by solar panel, other than some other structure he could probably put in as a matter of right. And with the setbacks and things, I think that was the thinking on a big lot. And because they're 40,000 square foot lots, by definition, they'd be a little further from your property line than they would be in an R10 or R20 area, for instance.
Depending on how the property is built, if it's long and skinny or if it's short and
You
fat.
are correct. And again, I think one of the things that you will see, Mr. Hamilton, is originally I had those as S's. That actually evolved at the planning board. Certainly not saying that it's their responsibility. The discussion was at some point some of those lots are large enough and these are small enough that why are we making the guy get one that's putting it in his yard just because he doesn't have the roof that faces south? Why can't he put the same size array in his side yard if he meets those requirements? But from a guy that's been on the zoning board, I understand your concerns on that.
Yeah, it's just a 1,600 foot array. Again, they just because it's permitted doesn't mean they get it automatically, because they have to go and get their approvals based on setbacks and things like that. But it's still, let's say the panels are 10 feet by, 10 by 10 feet. You're still looking at 10 by 16 of them in somebody's backyard.
Yeah, well, 40 by 40 or 80 by 20, you are correct.
Yeah.
depending on how that square footage worked out. They are limited. I don't know if it's a saving grace or not, but right now they're limited to 12 feet high. We don't know what the industry will bring. They weren't always 12 feet high. They have certainly evolved, but they are also, that's the size of the height anyway, of a Home Depot shed, not of a 35-foot building sitting next to a neighbor. But again, I certainly understand your concern.
So I'm just thinking of the ones that are now currently at off of Stringham Road on what's his face's farm. Sorry, I'm
Chase.
picturing
Chase
looking
Farm.
at that on somebody's in somebody's backyard instead.
I think that's bigger, but you are correct. The only one I truly know, I don't want to use the gentleman's name, but the only one I truly know of is in one of the neighborhoods on the east side. And there hasn't necessarily been complaints by neighbors. What happened is he put in a small array, certainly no bigger than he put on his roof. That created some issues of they were mounted. If I mount them as a lean-to and I allow storage underneath them, are they a shed or are they a solar panel? Can I really make? But when we change the small array to not being able to exceed your existing lot coverage, then it was kind of thought it might not matter whether or not they were created in the shape of a shed or not, because he could have had a shed. And as long as he met the setback, and as long as he met the lot coverage, then that would be a permissible use of the property.
So just to confirm, just because there's a P there on an R40, they still have to go to the building inspector. They may not have to go through the full zoning board, but they still have to get approval to make sure that they're exceeding their lot coverage.
Let me explain that, yes. Not only do they have to get a building permit because it's a structure the same way you do on a roof, but they have to, by state law, comply to the zoning, the building code that was changed for all solar. So they have all a special electrical building code. We're not allowed to do that as towns. We're not allowed to make it more stringent than the building code. We are not allowed to pass zoning that increases that. But they have a substantial licensing and permitting that includes electrical codes, state solar codes, as well as the town building code. So they'll still have a 3 process. What they won't have is surface water runoff, that type of, the type of stuff in a major land review. So, but again, if those were changed, that's, I would understand that as well.
Do you have any more comments from counselors? I do remember there was at least one. And we have Mr. Crosby, Mr. Grebe. Mr. Grebe's hand was up. So let me go to.
We still have a question from the council.
Oh, sorry. Is that Len? Sorry.
No, I just noticed Council Member Abbott.
Oh, no, I just wanted to add, I kind of would like to echo Keith's concerns, and I would be in favor of changing that P under the R40 to an S, if we want to discuss that.
Okay. Let's take some comments here, questions, and then we can come back and circle back with the counselors. Tom, let's go to Tom. Is that Mr. Grebe? Hello, Tom? Hello? Tom, are you there? Your hand was up for a while. All right, let's come back to Tom. Let's go to Mr. Crosby. Mr. Crosby?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
I would like to say that we echo the planning board's advisory opinion, and Mike and I agree with Mr. Chappelle's proposal to amend the zoning ordinance.
Mr. Crosby. That's true. Anything else, Mr. Crosby? Are you?
No, I'm good. I think that this is a good compromise from where we have been with the proposals that have been before us before, and this is a good way to move forward with allowing solar, both accessory uses and industrial uses into our town. So it's a good thing.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Crosby. Let's try to go back to Tom. Okay, now we've got Tom. Hello. How about let's try Nancy. Nancy?
Can you hear me on Nancy's?
Yes, we got you now.
I'm sure.
I'm so much better at this than he is.
She's so much better at this.
Yes.
So do you both have a question or just one?
No, just one.
All right.
Two devices, one question. Tom Grieve, 110 Sayre Drive, and I'm glad that you can't see me because I haven't had a haircut for at least 3.5 months. My comments are, a lot of good work has been done on this ordinance, and there are a number of improvements over our neighboring towns. However, there are still issues that need to be considered by the council. The first is the solar system matrix on page 1, which is what we've been talking about. The special use permit process needs to be used in a few more instances. Large and medium arrays in the commercial, C1, and waterfront WD zones should require a special use permit. Solar arrays have been ruled industrial land use by the Superior Court. These two zoning classifications are not industrial. The only change I am requesting would be that the special use designation be used for large and medium arrays in these zones, giving the abutters and neighbors a chance to weigh in on land usage near them that is not conforming. That is a major reason behind the special use permit process. The same reasoning should hold for R40 and R60 zones wanting to install small ground arrays. Neighbors deserve a chance to be heard, especially with houses south of the array that may have questions about glare panels, or those with houses close to the array that may want to make landscaping requests. The final problem is that according to page 4 of the ordinance, lot coverage is being calculated by the sum of the panel areas. On October 18th, 2018, our zoning board voted with Mr. Gavin's agreement that this coverage for ground-mounted solar arrays will be calculated as the full size of the array area, not the sum of the individual panels. I want to make a short side comment here. And we noticed the problem in the discussion between Mr. Chappelle and Mr. Hamilton. They talked about a 40 by 40 area. That would be the zoning board area. However, if the individual panels were taken as opposed to the land in its entirety, it would be about 50% larger. So that's an important distinction. The zoning board voted 5-0, and you can read it in the minutes of the October 18th, 2018 meeting, that is the way they wanted the solar structure array treated. For a town that always wants to retain its rural character, the zoning board calculation for lot coverage is most appropriate. And I would ask that you change this part of the ordinance to coincide with the zoning board's decision. That's the end of my comments. And if anybody's got a comment back to me, I'm happy to respond, but.
Thank you, Mr. Grieve. Do we have? I think we're going to go back to Mr. Chappelle. We'll go back to Mr. Chappelle shortly. Hold on.
I'm here. I'm here.
Gotcha. Hold on one second.
Sorry.
Just hold on one second. Do we get are the other ones? There's Tom. Nancy. They're still on.
I can, yeah.
Can you mute them just so we
Yeah.
don't get any background?
Right.
Oh, okay, Mr. Chappelle.
Thank you. I just want to address those two things because I think they're good comments, but it's different than my understanding of what should be done. First of all, the neighbors in a major land review are notified, everyone within 200 feet. That is not the same as a special use permit, again, is a conditional use. But although they are allowed in these commercial and light industry and industry areas, the neighbors are all invited. They are all notified. They are there to say how it affects them. There are specific requirements of the, or specific liberties giving the planning board that they can address vegetation. They can address and ask for landscape architects. They can specifically design the array to make sure that abutters' concerns are met, or even that street views are blocked. So there is a full public hearing. There is a technical difference, obviously, from those of you that sat on the zoning board on whether or not something's allowed, like a PUD, for instance. Most of these public urban development projects on the planning board, the resort district, that's allowed as a matter of right. That doesn't mean that the public isn't notified. And it doesn't mean that I, as a neighbor, don't have the right to say, I don't want that too close to me, or I would like the following screening, or I'd like to increase this or increase that. But like everything the planning board has, including subdivisions, if you meet the requirements, you're generally allowed, as opposed to a special use permit where you're only allowed if we feel we can put on a set of conditions that do this. It's kind of a technical difference, but I remind you again that this ordinance goes further than the model. The model generally says, make it permitted or non-permitted and send it to the planning board for review. We've made this more burdensome for residentials, not less. And we've made it more burdensome than what the state model is. When you look at lot coverage, I want to address that. In small arrays, so in the areas that we're talking about that are in residential areas, you cannot exceed the lot coverage of your lot. So if you have an R20, 20,000 square foot lot and a 2,000 square foot house, you're in a garage and this, you can only, like you're putting on an addition, put in so much more area. And they measure the panels, as he says, as the outside dimensions of the panels. Let me explain what happened in the October meeting. It was after our Superior Court said your ordinance was no good. And it was an application, part on a light industry piece and part on a residential piece that were being combined, that there were discussions about whether we should even be there or not. And Jamie Edwards at the time, who I have great respect for, other than kind of that decision, we have always looked at a solar panel as, and every ordinance counts a solar panel, as if it's a 4x8 panel laying on the ground, that's 32 square feet. Quite frankly, and in my opinion, a discussion not to go forward without an ordinance, he proposed that if you put all the panels in an array and then draw the fence around them, we should count the entire fence around them as the area. Now, that automatically means 80% or 100%. If I put a fence on my boundaries, set back 50 feet, and then put an array in the middle, that's 100% lot coverage on any lot we ever do. So on not only the model ordinance, but our ordinance, It says not in small arrays because we don't want that many panels on it. We want to make sure a guy can't put any more panels than he could the size of a garage. But for the medium and large, we increase setbacks to 50 feet on every side, where, as you know, they might be 30 feet in some areas and 20 feet in some areas, but it's 50 feet in every side. We mandate that it's a vegetated buffer of not less than 30 feet. Anything that comes into a residential, that there's 6-foot fences, but the area inside, if I put those panels close together or far apart, once it's a solar panel array, I really it defies logic that if I'm a neighbor and I'm against it, and I'm okay that I'm a neighbor and I'm against it, but I look out and I say, when I see 200 panels, if those panels were 2 feet closer together, they'd be uglier than if they were 20 feet apart. And that's the only thing that lot coverage would do. It would just push panels together and not be able to mow between them and those things, because you'd put them closer. So the ordinance for the areas that industrial, commercial, waterfront, the areas that are more likely to have this type of use, they just make sure the setbacks are there and it's not a specific lot coverage issue. Remember, what the state has kind of said is, you've got, for years, we've protected the lands of Portsmouth by allowing farming. Allowing farming keeps us exactly what we want to see. But if you're it doesn't really get much income for the owner that rents out his farm, and it certainly doesn't help the town when we knock the taxes down by 60% or whatever and take it away. If I have 20 acres and I want to preserve my land, it may only be a punt, but if I want to preserve my land for 20 years and not sell it off and not, I still pay the exact same tax to the town. If I have a 20-acre industrial piece that's taxed at $1 million, it's taxed at $1 million before you put a solar on it. It's taxed at $1 million after you put a solar on it. The town then just comes in and says, well, that's an improvement on the property, and we should be able to tax the improvement. And there used to be an argument of whether that could be taxed by the value of the cost of how much it costs to put those panels on, or the income approach by how much they generated. And as you know, and your tax assessor will tell you, the state came in and said, no, for every kilowatt, we're going to pay you X cents. And the town wins both ways. They get the revenue of personal property or improvements on the property. They get the land property. The land stays undeveloped. It's just that it looks different undeveloped than the farm may look. But there's no noise, there's no odor, there's no chemicals and pesticides, and it is supposed to solve a lot of problems of our world with fossil fuels and energy. That's why it's proposed. But you need to really take out a crayon and draw a 10-acre lot and draw what that lot coverage is when you start putting these 8-10 feet apart in rows. And you realize you're going to take a 40-acre lot and utilize only 20% of it. Just that square of the fence can only be 20%. That's just not going to get the industry here. It's not going to do what your initiative is. It has to be a practical solution that balances the needs of the solar industry with the needs of neighbors. And it's not going to change the difference between what you're looking out at. It's only going to change how compact it is. So I would respectfully not accept those comments. Again, I don't have any problem with changing the P's to S's for the small system. And if you think a commercial is different than a residential, but these by definition have to be, a commercial spot that's a 20,000 square foot spot on East Main Road is not going to be anything but a small solar if it's going to be anything at all. These are the few pieces in town, and you probably can drive up and down the road and figure them all out all by yourself, that are either commercial or industry, that have the acreage and the exposure from the south and the east and the west that are going to allow this. By definition, they're everything that we have proposed and been asked to propose is a fairly large parcel.
Thank you, Mr. Chappelle. Are there any more comments from councilors? I have a couple comments. I just wanted to make sure before I said anything, I was just trying to see if we have looks like I'm gonna go out on a limb. Is it Tom again? I know it says Nancy.
Yes, it is.
I
I wanted to respond. There's a few things Mr. Chappelle misunderstood. In terms of the large and medium arrays, I've got no problem if they want to use the panel size. I was talking about the small arrays in the especially in the residential areas. That's where I do not think that we should be using the, because he compares it continually to a shed, and the shed is a square foot area, and that's what we're talking about. The array is a square foot area, not the panels. So that's what I'm fine if he wants to do this and have the lot coverage calculated differently for the large and medium-sized arrays, but not in the residential area for small arrays. The other thing is, I think he's entirely wrong on especially the waterfront district. He says that the neighbors are notified, neighbors within 200 feet. Well, first of all, that's what, it's not on the zoning or the town to do that. It's on the people that are applying for the solar array. Those people, for whatever reason, and Mr. Chappelle will remember, I think very clearly in the meeting that he was talking about, the October 18th meeting, those people did not notify the abutting neighbors. Many abutting neighbors did not know, and they held the meeting over. So that argument, especially if they are not required to go beyond the 200 feet in a waterfront area, I look out over NEB, and NEB is clearly a half a mile away from it. So the people that are going to be affected by these arrays may be well beyond 200 feet. And so I reject the idea that just because you're going to notify anybody within 200 feet of the array, that you've covered everybody that's going to be affected. That's just not the way it's going to be. On top of that, we've got 12, potentially 12-foot panels with a 6-foot fence. That's pretty industrial looking. That doesn't look like a shed. It doesn't look like a garage. It doesn't look like a normal outbuilding, a pool, a tennis court. It's very industrial looking, and that's the reason for the Superior Court decision, I believe. So I'm willing to concede on the large and medium arrays that if he wants to do the coverage the way he wants to do it, that's fine. I think in a residential area, that just plain does not fit. And it doesn't fit his explanations, and it doesn't fit what one of your own counselors thought about when it was described to him. So it's clearly misleading in terms of what is or should be allowed. I think that is my rebuttal. And I would ask that you especially look at the R40, R60 areas and the waterfront area. The commercial area, I still think should be looked at for especially for the special use permit, so that the neighbors, because commercial areas are often found right next to residential areas, that the neighbors should be notified. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Crosby got tired, maybe? Mr. Crosby went away. Oh, Mr. Crosby. Hold on, Mr. Crosby, we'll unmute you.
Mute. No, Mr. Crosby didn't get tired. Mr. Crosby is trying to understand how we can zone our the land in Portsmouth to the needs of the entire citizenry instead of just the need of the R40 and R60 property owners.
All right, I don't have any response. Mr. Katzman, do you have a comment or, okay. Okay. I would like to just offer my opinion here on a couple of things. There's been a lot of good comments, and some of the last stuff. I might have a question for Mr. Gavin. I would agree on the R40, R60 that those probably should go as special use permits, and I say that to protect both the applicants of a solar petition as well as the abutting property owners. And with a lot of my time on the zoning board, and even with some of the time on the council, I think some of the problems that we run into in some development projects are the unintended consequences that may slip through the cracks. And on these solar panels, if an R40 or an R60 was allowed up to a 1,600 square foot array, let's call it, like we said, it's 40 by 40, 20. I mean, you could get a lot of runoff during a storm event. And what we tend to have problems with is people getting flooded out, neighbors getting flooded out, and that's generally where you run into a lot of animosity with residents in residential areas, is encroachment onto their property. And you could, if it's just a permitted use and someone goes out and says, well, it's permitted in R40 and I meet my setbacks, and they put up a bunch of arrays, and then all of a sudden we have a drainage problem, it's kind of hard to deal with. At least we would get some review by the zoning board if it were a special use permit. A lot of discussion about views and what you look at. Spent a lot of time on the zoning board. And one of Mr. Knott's famous comments was views are not rights. So as an abutter, if you have your property, you should be allowed to build on it within the town standards. It might always be pleasing to your neighbors, but as long as you build within the ordinance, you should be entitled to build. But I would support, special use permits in R40 and R60. That way, all of our residential properties, whether it's an R10 or an R60, would have, the zoning board would have an opportunity to take a look at it. And you will be surprised at how many properties in town are commercial light industrial that have houses built on them, because they are, it was the highest and best use of the land value. So people put up homes in commercial areas and light industrial areas throughout Portsmouth. And so I do think it's important that we have, these projects be reviewed. Mr. Gavin, on a major land development that goes through the planning board, is that a public notice? I mean, that should be public notice, correct? So the butters are notified?
If I'm understanding you correctly, I thought you were talking about changing the P to an S, which would
No, I would support P to S in residential. I'm sorry, I jumped. When I looked at major land development under the other comments, which were commercial, industrial, where those have M's, major land development, is that a public, is there a notice for butters? Through the planning board?
I would think so. I wasn't, intimately involved in putting this together. Mr. Chappelle did, and with the plan. But I think there would be, it's not sure, but I think there would be notice. Certainly there would be public notice under the Open Meetings Act. I don't know, Gary, if you can.
Well, I know that those all go through, planning board, commercial, light industrial. I mean, these solar arrays, would they be accessory uses and stuff like that on? I mean, most of our properties are pretty much developed, right? I mean, what's the threshold for, is there a threshold that these would trigger? Even if this was a permitted use, would anything trigger, like special use by the zoning board or not? In any of those areas, it wouldn't?
Well, if it was a permitted use, it would just be based on the administrative review of the application to see if it meets setbacks and lot coverage and so forth. If it's a special use permit, obviously, as you know, it would
Right.
go to the board review. And whether to do that or not, it's a policy decision.
Now, I mean, I'm okay with the table, with the exception of the R40 and R60. I would like to see those have special use permits associated with them, just to protect all the residential properties.
Right.
That would be my take.
That's the way when the Jepson proposal was in, that's basically the zoning board determined that it was most akin to a public utility use, which requires a special use permit in all zoning districts, and then they went through the zoning in the special use permit criteria and so forth. So what you're suggesting would just mean that very same type of review.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from other counselors? Or I see some hands up. I just wanted to touch base I wanted to circle back to see if the counselors had any more questions, comments. Let me go back to Mr. Crosby.
Yes, I would just like to say that I am a very big fan of the special use permit process. I think it's the best way that you get everybody in a room at the same time. All the abutters are notified, and it's a way to make sure that everybody is heard and a proper decision is made.
Thank you, Mr. Crosby. I'm going to jump back to Mr. Chappelle.
Thanks. I was just going to answer one of your questions.
Sure.
The special use permit on the residential, again, I'm not, that came up at the planning board. I have no problem with it being changed if a special permit adds some extra criteria that the council feels should be there. I just want to tell you and point out, I'm on page 4 of 8 now, section F. Just because 2 of you were zoning board guys and not necessarily planning board guys, when you file at the planning board under major land review, you have a full checklist. And look at what that checklist has. It clearly is the petitioner's burden to notify one within 200 feet. That 200 feet is because that's the same notice what we have now. That's the zoning board notice that's always been the case. I get that big important petitions, people more than 200 feet find their way to them because they end up in newspapers and neighbors talking. But we have to give a full survey of the lot. We have to give a construction schedule. We have to give an operation and maintenance plan, photo simulation, emergency response, tax revenue estimates, on and on. But when you get to K and L, which are at the top of page 5, we need to give the list of abutters with 200 feet and pay the fee that notifies them all. So it's technically like a zoning petition, the town's notifying them, but it is the petitioner that pays to have them notified, and and petition itself that mandates that. We have to give a locus map with an aerial view, something that's not in zoning, showing what's 1,000 feet around this area, just so everybody understands this isn't a small picture. These could be big picture items, and we want to know. The state did not recommend 1,000-foot notice. I don't think those of you that have been on a zoning board know that in the wrong area of town, that could be a very extensive list. But they certainly start with everybody within 200 feet. And it's not 200 feet of the center. If I propose something in the center of a 40-acre lot, it's not 200 feet from where I propose. It's 200 feet from the outskirts of my lot. And if I have a 40-acre lot, that could be 16 different neighborhoods and 300 different people. And then the talk, and certainly on bigger petitions, we get lots of people from town, industries, people pro, people con. It becomes a buzz on these bigger petitions. So I don't think notice is real. No one's sneaking anything in under major plan review. It is the same, as you say, we built Newport Beach Club as a PUD with no special use permit and no zoning. It's not that it's any less stringent than what you people are used to for special use permits. It's just that the planning board is making these decisions and not necessarily the zoning board. Remember, I also said that if you go to try to get a special use permit, you have to go to the planning board as well. Even if the zoning board gives us a special use permit, it then goes to the planning board to make sure there's consistency with the integrity of the project and the things that planning boards specialize in, which I consider the physical structure and layout of any plan, the infrastructure of a plan, the electric and utilities, the surface water runoff. The same way when the president sat on the zoning board, you may have approved a condominium complex, but not before you sent it to the planning board for all of that physical criteria and layout. So we have in residential areas, both boards, both giving notice looking at it. In the industrial areas, all you've done is follow the recommendations of the state model that tend to streamline this more in areas that the council says, you know, I'm okay with streamlining it in areas like industry and commercial. Because again, we can call it manufacturing, but it's a fairly innocuous land use as it relates to the reasons we regulate land. I don't want industry in a residential area because I don't want it loud. I don't want it to smell. I don't want a lot of traffic. I don't want a lot of site pollution. I don't want all of those things. These aren't wind towers. They don't make noise. You don't see them. You don't smell them. You have to plant them with special grass so the bees can pollinate, but doesn't grow fast enough, so you need to maintain them too often. They are really a fairly innocuous use. They may be well suited for our industrial lands because we can't seem to get plants here now, you know, factories here nowadays, whether we want them or not. But they are good uses for these areas and not necessarily, and they don't need that extra layer of protection that I think you get from these boards, because the first layer is a very solid layer with notice, with all input. And if you look at what the planning board can do, they can alter and make you put larger buffers, smaller buffers, hire landscape architects, do full studies on surface water drainage, fix a surface water drainage problem that you're not adding to. From being at the hearings and promoting this for another client, remember that the solar panels are always tilted at an angle of X degrees. So even if you have a 4x8 panel, it's tilted and the rain hits it and goes down. It doesn't channel water in different directions like a roadway, because under them is just the grass and the earth, which is accepting the water the same as if it rained without them. It just tends to concentrate that 4x8 area into the area it drips off the bottom. But by definition, they are equally dispersed around the property. So we have certainly heard many experts testify they don't enhance problems. Even though if you had a problem next door to it and you were, no matter where it was, whether you were a resident living next to industry or whether you were a resident living next to an R40, you would have the opportunity to say, before you approve this, I had a problem before, and I would like you to fix that problem as a condition of doing this. And the board can decide to do that. So there's I think there's plenty of safeguards built in to the various areas throughout town.
Thank you, Mr. Chappelle. And I think I got one last one, and I believe it's Mr. Greed, even though it says Nancy.
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
We got you. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to one of the things that I think this town is negligent in is that for these notices, there is no penalty for not noticing people within the 200 range. And I truly believe 200 feet is very, very, very small. I would say if you're going to do that, at least put in here some sort of penalty. They're supposed to do it. Well, what happens if they don't notify people? Because I'm telling you, and you can look at the zoning board meetings, the last solar panel on West Main Road here did not notify people within 200 feet, and there's no penalty for it. Dollar General had the same problem. There were people that were within 200 feet, maybe 250, that were not notified. No penalties whatsoever. And yeah, they were supposed to do it, but oh well. That's something that I think we need to fix as a town, and maybe that's not for tonight, but you could at least put in a penalty for not notifying the abutters in this ordinance. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grieve. And Mr. Crosby.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that Mr. Gavin could probably weigh in on this better than me, but it seems to me that we have a due process of the law, and I don't understand how we can treat a small property owner different than a large property owner as far as notification is concerned.
I can just say that, every once in a while, someone makes a mistake in the notification, and then it's brought to the attention of the applicant, and they have to fix it. I mean, there's nothing in the Zoning Enabling Act that would impose some kind of penalty or fine on someone for making a mistake on the notification. If the person was entitled to notification as an abutter and didn't receive notice, then they could use that as a grounds to appeal to Superior Court if the petition was granted when the hearing went forward, when they didn't get notice. So, and there's nothing in the Zoning Enabling Act that would allow to put some kind of penalty against someone for mistakenly mistakenly excluding someone from the list of abutters. So I don't think that's really feasible or justified under the law.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin. Okay. If we could regroup back with counselors. Do we have, go back to the table? We get the table back up. I forget which page it was. So we definitely had some discussion about possibly modifying the table for some.
Do we need to move to close the public hearing?
We could. Yeah. So we have.
I move we close the public hearing.
Keith Hamilton, second.
All in favor?
Mr. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion
Mr. President,
7-0. Mr. Hamilton, go ahead.
under the tables, I would move that we change both R40 and R60 under small solar energy systems, line 3 there, to special use permit S's rather than P's.
Danielle, I second that.
A motion and a second. All those in favor?
Mr. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Nay.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 6-1.
Mr. President, I would move that we approve the ordinance as amended.
Andrew Kelly, second.
All those in favor?
Mr. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. On to new business number 2. This one is mine. I had received a request from the town council president, the town of Warren. They were assembling a letter requesting support requesting that the state aid that the state will be receiving as part of the COVID reimbursement, the $1.25 billion stimulus money that was being provided to the state. The town of Warren and a few other communities have a draft letter that they are just asking the governor for proportional aid to the smaller cities and towns. It was addressed to myself as the president of the council, but I didn't feel comfortable, signing the letter without at least gaining some input from my fellow councilors. Some towns maybe don't feel it's necessary to share that with the other councilors. I just took it as an opportunity to at least get some feedback from you councilors to see if you're in support of sending a request in with the town of Warren and a few other towns, just asking for equal or proportional disbursement of funds to the municipalities. If you have any concerns, I can pass them along. If you don't have any objections, I'd be happy to sign the letter. I just wanted to get some feedback from councilors so that any action that we take as a council and not just an individual.
Yeah, Mr. President, I would move that we table this item. I had a conversation with the person who drafted the letter, and it's just too vague, talking about proportional reimbursement. We're a small town. I don't want to put us in a position, and our COVID cases are quite low relative to the rest of the state, and I don't want to put us in a position of somehow indicating that we would be satisfied with less than what would be fair. Frankly, I really think that what we should be pushing the state to do is not cut our educational payments from the state and not cut our municipal support, and push for that rather than talk about this 1.25 billion COVID response money. It's not all going to go to the municipalities, as I think might be implied in the letter by accident. It's being spent in so many other ways that it makes sense for the municipalities to act, but not to make the statements that are in the draft letter I saw. And I think that when I spoke to the chair, the person who drafted it, she was comfortable with us tabling this and asking our staff and to look into what the best ask would be to the state for these funds. So I would make a motion to table this to give our staff a chance to talk to other towns.
And Len Katzman, I second the motion to table.
All right.
Joe? All right. No, I that's why I wanted to put it out there and get some feedback. I think as counselors, everyone should have some input here, and I thank you for the comments, and we have a motion and a second to table. All those in favor?
Hey, Mr. President, if I may, I don't mind tabling it. I do have a concern that decisions will be made within the next 2 weeks at the state level that could affect whatever reimbursements we do get. But they're pretty strict. My main concern is that they would just grab it and fill the gigantic budget hole that we have But theoretically, they can't do that. So my only concern is that by not acting, we're being complicit to let them do whatever they want with the money. And I want to make sure that we are protected as a town as well, to make sure that we are getting whatever portion it is. I mean, even $1 million out of that $1.2 billion would go a long way to help out the town of Portsmouth. And I want to make sure that we're not handicapping ourselves.
Well, I mean, we could draft our own letter and send it in, just representing ourselves in order to not miss out on an opportunity. And I think to try to get some consensus from other communities, that could be tough, because I think everybody's got their own, specific wants and needs and concerns for their citizens as well. So I think it's a good idea to let the governor know that we could use some aid, and maybe we should put our own letter. And I'd be okay with that too.
I think that, the East Bay communities have not been treated fairly. I understand what you're saying, Mr. President, but I also don't want to abandon the notion that we make a concerted effort to have the state stop focusing on Providence and other communities not in the East Bay. And we probably have a little bit more clout if we join together. So theoretically, I'm behind that effort. It's just that this letter isn't that. So again, I think if we tape, I don't know, Mr. Hamilton, if it's going to make a difference if we get out a letter asking for this money, because we need to back up the justification for it. And this letter is just too vague. It says, be fair. I don't know.
I would see it. Yeah, I agree.
I don't disagree with you on that, Ms. Susie Booth. I would rather we do something rather than nothing, and I would expand outside of the East Bay. I think I was having a discussion earlier today about the 295 belt and how much influence the State House and within that 295 belt of the cities. I mean, I would certainly, further down in our correspondence, have a bunch of letters from Smithfield and North Smithfield about educational funding. I think we should incorporate this letter to all the suburban communities, Westerly, Charlestown, and Hopkinton, and everywhere else, not just the East Bay, because we've all been shortchanged over the past 10 years, especially with educational funding.
Okay. Any further comments, concerns?
Well, so I guess my motion is to table this and request that the staff consider sending a letter that might benefit Portsmouth and making a request concerning the 1.25 billion.
Can we just make that the staff bring something to us on the 25th so that we can review it before it goes to up north?
26.
Oh, I thought you thought it was more of a time crunch, but
yeah,
sure.
It is, but I'll go with my cynical side that says they're not going to listen to us anyways, but
at least have an opportunity. We'll have an opportunity to review and put something together.
Yeah.
So we did have a motion to table. Then do we have a second? Or
Mr. Katzman.
Any further questions, comments? All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Passes 7-0. Thank you all. On to business number 3. It's discuss and determine whether to restrict access to Sandy Point Beach this summer. Ms. Abbott?
Yes, I've had several residents in Portsmouth reach out to me with this concern. I know we are in communication with other municipalities and the state as to how they're going to manage opening beaches. I do think Sandy Point Beach as our town beach is a little bit different from, Second Beach and Narragansett and other beaches in that we don't charge residents to use it, and we do allow other visitors to come and pay a $7 fee. So there's a couple concerns that I think would be good to discuss. One, if and when the beach is open, should we restrict access to just Portsmouth residents, just Aquidneck Island residents, just Rhode Island residents? Sandy Point Beach is a beach where we check everybody's ID at the gate when they're coming in. And if it says Portsmouth on your ID, or if you can show that you live in Portsmouth somehow, you don't pay the $7 fee. So we have a checkpoint in place already where we could implement some kind of control to limit the numbers of people going to the beach, because we don't know what it's going to look like this summer. And then the other concern is having somebody there trying to take $7 cash from everybody that's coming in from out of state, from across the state. And, you know, that alone might not be able to happen because there's a lot of businesses and, I mean, you pretty much can't use cash in most places nowadays anyway. So there's just a lot of concerns. I know we're talking to, like I said before, we're talking to RIDEM and the state on how what the beaches are going to look like when they are reopened. But there's just a lot of nuance in how we manage Sandy Point Beach. There's also the concern that we have missed out on potential state funding because of how we manage the fees that we charge at the beach. As in, we're not eligible for state grants because we don't charge Portsmouth residents, but we charge others. Maybe we need to restructure that, and this summer is going to look very different, and now might be a good time to do that. I have had a lot of people reach out to me that are in favor of restricting access to the beach because we might have to do that anyway, whether it's through a reservation system or just limiting the numbers. And if we're going to do that, can we at least give Portsmouth residents priority over others? So there's a lot of issues, and I don't think we necessarily need to make a decision right now, but we usually open the beaches for Memorial Day. I don't know if that's going to be happening or if that's going to be delayed, but I think it's an issue that maybe all our counselors should weigh in on.
Would anyone like to weigh in?
I will. I don't necessarily disagree with, I guess it would be more not restricting, but monitoring the amount of individuals coming to the beach, and whether that's, I'm going to guess there's 100 spaces down there, give or take. I don't know what the exact number of spaces is. But limiting the number of spaces or percentaging it off. And let's say 80% of the spaces are reserved for Portsmouth residents and 20% from outside of Portsmouth. That would limit the outside influence. I think at this point, technically state mandates from the governor are outside of Rhode Island residents aren't allowed there, period. But I've seen conflicting things on that where you can drive in and go fishing, but you can't drive in and go boating. So I don't understand the two of those. But I think we need to iron some of those out, but I don't have a problem necessarily with restricting the amount of spaces available to non-Portsmouth residents. And if you want to, do 20%, 80-20, you want to do 70-30, you want to do 70-30, and it's 10% outside around and, 20% inside around, whatever it is. But I think that's probably the easiest way to figure that one out. And I do have a concern, your same concern with the money that you have. Having 15 and 16-year-old kids down there taking money that has been God knows where.
That alone, that can't happen. So if we're going to charge anybody fees, we're going to have to come up with some kind of way to do it electronically or ahead of time. I worry about the cost and effort required in implementing that and whether it's worth it. If we are going to do it, then I would suggest maybe we increase the fee to cover the expense of trying to come up with some kind of system that's not a 17-year-old taking cash at the gate. The easiest thing would be to just limit it to Portsmouth residents who typically don't pay a fee, and the expense of it comes out of our property taxes anyway. I think the situation that most people would like to avoid is we open the beach, the numbers are restricted, but we don't have a system in place to give Portsmouth residents a priority. And then we try to go and Portsmouth residents can't get to the beach. And I think that would be very frustrating to most Portsmouth residents. So I will, sound like a broken record, but I don't think we need to decide something tonight, but within the next 2 weeks, there is going to be a lot more talk about how and when to open the beaches. And I would like to see a plan for how we're going to manage Sandy Point Beach and address these specific concerns that are a little different from the big beaches that charge people $30 to park and are open to thousands and thousands every day.
Well, I think we need to do something now before Memorial Day. I mean, our next meeting's not till after Memorial Day.
Agreed. I would be inclined to do that as well if others are comfortable that we have enough information.
Well, my concern would be that you have the overflow from those beaches that may or may not be open, and they'll just say, "Oh, I'll go pay the $7."
Let's go to Sandy Point Beach.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mr. President, I would chime in here and just say that Sandy Point Beach is just one area that our police have to enforce the COVID-19 rules on, and that I'd like to hear from our police chief if he has thoughts about how best to ensure the health and safety of our citizens at that beach, but also, in a larger context.
Can I just add one thing to that? I agree with you, Linda. We have a lot of beaches and open spaces that need to be policed. However, Sandy Point Beach is our official town beach. It's where we hold summer camp and swimming lessons and sailing lessons and have a lot of our programming. It's the only beach where we currently have a system in place where we check people in at the door and charge an entrance fee. So there is a little bit of a control mechanism that makes it a little bit easier to maintain access for all Portsmouth residents while limiting numbers to a certain extent. But
I guess so. But I mean, when people have talked about limiting Sandy Point Beach access in the past, one issue is that people park on Sigourney or Sandy Point Avenue or the other neighboring streets. And so it's not like there's just no way to get to that beach except to park in that lot.
But we'd still be saving the lot for Portsmouth residents, right? So.
Well, and property owners, I would assume you mean, right? Because you
Yes,
could be a
of course.
Florida resident who pays property taxes in Portsmouth because you own property here. So we'd have to be able to, accommodate those folks. I think overall,
as we do today.
Right. Overall, I know that the governor is going to be coming out with more, I hate to keep saying that we have to pay attention to what's happening in the state, but it's hard to make municipal decisions when we have to fit what the criteria are going to be as dictated by the state. So I know that those rules are going to be coming out soon. And I feel like we should be thinking about it, of course, but we should also be kind of waiting to hear what the state rules are going to be. So,
Andrew?
I'd like to hear Rick, the town administrator's opinion. I just first want to say that I don't feel comfortable with having probably any part-time staff dealing with the public on a Sandy Point Beach.
Agreed.
Period. None. Zero.
Right, hold on one second, Andrew, I think we heard most of what you said. Somehow I don't know if it's your microphone, but a lot of what you said was cut off, at least on my end.
Okay.
Could you just say that? Could you just repeat that?
Well, I'd like to hear from Rich Rayner, our town administrator, and what the current plans are, but I personally don't feel comfortable having any part-time staff, particularly young part-time staff, down at the beach interacting with the public at all.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, as most people are probably aware, the only thing that we have closed in Portsmouth are the playgrounds and the dog park. The beaches are open right now, and specifically, we're talking about Sandy Point and the Corey Beach. And I'll ask Brian and Chief Peters to weigh in here in a second, but we have been sending patrols to those areas more frequently to monitor what the visit load has been and who's using those beaches. And of course, the weather hasn't been amenable to true beach enjoyment right now. Typically, you're absolutely right. The way it works is we hire people and people check people at the parking lot, and you have to, if you're not a resident, you have to pay a fee. And there's never been an issue. The issue that we would face if we are going to start restricting people is now tempers are going to rise, and we're going to be putting young people in a very untenable situation. So if we were to go that route, we have to think about how we would enforce that at the parking lot. The other point is absolutely dead on. When we have tried to implement any measures nearing this in the past, people just, and most people who want to avoid the fee, they park along Sandy Point. We had to restrict parking there. And so now they go into the neighborhoods. We create a kind of a cascading effect. What we've been promoting so far is a wait and see attitude. Let's see if it does in fact become a problem, one. Two, there are two measures that are in place right now under the governor's executive orders that are verifiable and eminently enforceable. And that is face masks and social distancing. That is something that a police officer can see, can readily gauge, and engage in the public, with as far as encouraging people to comply with those measures. So we don't know what the council wants us to do. So far, what we've been doing has been working, but I think Councilor Abbott is correct that as the weather gets warmer, if the other beaches on the island are not open, there will be an influx of people going to Sandy Point. I have talked to the administrators in Newport and Middletown, and they are trying to come up with plans to open those beaches. What the conditions and guidelines are going to be, I don't know right now. I'd only be speculating. So we've been trying to do this in lockstep, or at least in tandem with what the other communities in Newport and what Newport and Middletown are doing, and what guidance we're going to get from the state. I anticipate that we're going to get some kind of guidance that is going to be kind of in line with what she's been doing in phase one, and that we're going to be asked to enforce social distancing and no groups, beach groups larger than 5. So it's going to be very difficult no matter what, whether it's Portsmouth residents, Quinnipiac Island residents, or all residents. It's going to be difficult to enforce no matter what we do. And so while, Mr. Kelly, that's not a direct answer to your question, I hope it emphasizes the fact that we've been thinking about this and talking about this every day. And at this point, if you don't mind, I'd like Chief Peters to weigh in, because he may have some ideas regarding how we would police this.
Thank you. The police have not seen any issues this far down at Sandy Point Beach. We have had probably about a dozen or so cars that have been up there on the weekends at times. I agree, once the summer weather comes, we probably will see more of an influx. I have talked to police chiefs around the state and coastal communities, and they haven't come up with any consensus so far. They're still working on plans of how they're going to do it in their respective communities to reopen their beaches. One of the concerns I do have as far as the unintended consequences of restricting Sandy Point is, I believe it was mentioned earlier, is parking is now going to be on the side streets such as Sigourney, where individual there that currently is no restrictions on Sigourney for parking. I also have concerns if people are turned away from Point Beach, they're going to go to other areas of town, such as Macquarie Beach. They'll park down at the Manor House, use the dock there, walk in from the Manor House property, which has been used before, or they'll then revert down to go to Park Avenue. So some of my concerns with that, with restrictions, is some of the unintended consequences where we have to also restrict parking on side streets and other areas to kind of limit the people. So those are some of the concerns that I have for the areas. And something I think the council will have to address as we move forward on this plan.
So if I may, I completely agree with all your concerns, Chief Peters. And I think the parking up the road and just going somewhere else it's probably an issue either way, whether we restrict it or not. To be honest, I feel like from what I'm coming from, I'm not looking at so much as restricting access to others, but how can we protect access for Portsmouth residents and make it as safe as possible for Portsmouth families to go and enjoy the beach this summer. So we're not all stuck at home for the next however long. And that's one way to do it, because it is, a small beach with limited parking. So I think we're going to have issues with enforcement regardless of what we do, and that's why there's no clear silver bullet on how to address this. I guess the question right now is, usually Memorial Day we open our beach and start charging parking for non-Portsmouth residents. Is the plan to just keep all the beaches open as is and just not do that? How long are we going to not do it and not have a plan in place? Because I think, like we've all said already, as the weather starts warming up, our numbers are going to go up a lot, and it would be good to have a plan in place before that happens.
With respect to how the beach gets open or not open, the beach is open. The beach has always been open.
I know.
You can only charge if you have lifeguards on the beach, and typically that starts Memorial Day weekend. And we're waiting to get some guidance from the state on what the guidelines and rules are going to be with respect to that. So right now the plan is to get guidance. So we've been told for the second week in a row, we're going to get guidance this week. And that will give us time to put, or at least either open the beach with lifeguards or just keep it as is for right now. So it may sound like nothing's being done, but there's an incredible amount of thought and work that's going on behind the scenes to try to make the right decision. But as Chief Peters alluded to, nobody's doing this the same way. And the important thing is that we don't create a situation where we're the only game in town and everybody flocks to the beach, which is what everybody's danger is, that we would put Portsmouth families at risk by having an influx of so many people at the beach. But I just don't know what that's going to be right now. We've never been here before. So our recommendation right now is let's try to continue working this with the other communities, with the Department of Health and DEM. And hopefully within the next couple of days, we can have a little bit more cogent discussion on what direction we should go in. I mean, if I were a betting person right now, I would say that the beaches are not going to be open until June. That's what she stated last week, that the beaches would saltwater beaches would not be open until June. So it's not a satisfactory answer for anybody. I understand that wholeheartedly. But then again, this is changing on almost a twice a day basis. I just don't have the answer for you.
Could we then, let's assume that we're not going to have lifeguards at the beach on Memorial Day, and it's not going to open like in a normal summer. And at our next meeting on May 26th, we can address if and how we are going to ensure that Portsmouth families have access to the beach throughout the summer?
Absolutely, and I don't think Memorial Day. Obviously, that's an important day because that's normally the weekend we open the beaches. But it's not an all or nothing. I mean, you meet on the 26th, which is right after Memorial Day, and you may have a very good yardstick for you and we can report to you on that Tuesday how the weekend went. I can
Yeah.
assure you, we're all watching this very closely, and as I said, I mean, we've got police down at Park Avenue, we've got police patrolling Macquarie, at Scenic Point, Teddy's Beach. We've got people that are going down to the Old Stone Bridge. So we know where people tend to congregate, and we're watching it. And so far, with the exception of Park Avenue, because of the restaurants that are down there, that we've not seen any influx of people beyond what is normal. So my recommendation right now would be let's proceed like we would normally proceed and see how it goes. If the crowds are not, I mean, we do have two very enforceable measures. If the crowds show up on Memorial Day weekend and they're not social distancing and they're not adhering to face masks, and there are problems, we can shut it down.
So just so I am sure that I understand, and I agree with your recommendations, but on Memorial Day weekend, we're not going to have 17-year-old lifeguards on the beach, and we're not going to have anybody collecting parking fees, and we'll address it in due course.
I don't know about the lifeguards, but I think right now having somebody collecting cash is probably not a good idea. I mean, the governor came out today and it's recommending everybody pay at restaurants without cash, so pay electronically. And you're right, we don't have that capability right now.
Not to make this any more complicated than it already is, but we have 17,000 people in this town. If a certain percentage of them decide to go to Sandy Point Beach on a Saturday, we may have to stagger them because you can't have people crowding onto the beach no matter where they're from. So I don't know, we might want to think about time slots, sort of like signing up for, the soccer field. You come in at a certain time because we will, regardless where the people are from on the beach, they have to maintain a safe distance. And if there's too many of them, we can't do that.
And I think that's where we are going to get more input from the state on what it should look like at the beach when you do put in those measures. Like we might have to limit parking and use every other spot. So I'm sure that there will be a lot of guidance from the state because, I mean, we have a Portsmouth-sized problem, but there's towns that have a much bigger problem when dealing with their beaches over the summer and a lot more volume. So I think we will have more clarity on that personally.
I would go the opposite direction. Instead of saying, let's not be open for Memorial Day, I would say, let's be ready to be open for Memorial Day. I think when we sit and wait for guidance from the governor, it's easier for us to shut it down than it is to ramp it up. If we proceed with going and saying, we're going to charge anybody who's from out of town, and we have the ability to do that somehow, whether it's Apple Pay or something on an iPad, I'd prefer to go that way and have lifeguards on duty ready to go for our Portsmouth residents, because if Second Beach and First Beach are closed, all of our residents who normally buy a pass to go down there won't have their opportunity. So I think we should go in the direction of being ready to be open for business at 9 o'clock on, what is that, the 23rd, 24th, whatever that day is.
We are proceeding with that, Mr. Hamilton. So I mean,
and as far as parking goes, get Brian to get a few signs and put no parking on those streets. And I know the chief's problem, if it's not listed, he can't give him a ticket. And it's not enforceable if there's not a sign that says you can't park here, May 1st to September 1st or whatever that time frame is, no daytime parking.
But we don't have a mechanism in place to charge people without using cash. So now we have to develop that before Memorial Day if we're going to open
That's not
business
hard,
as usual.
Wendy may already have that, and we just don't know about it.
And if more people than we are able to handle start showing up, what criteria are we going to use to turn people away? Who's going to be there to enforce that?
First come, first serve. I mean, that's what it is now. If the parking lot's full, you turn around and go away.
And does the 17-year-old start showing people off or?
Yes.
That's what they do.
And Wendy's there too. Let's not just say it's going to be 17-year-olds. Wendy's very good about being at the beach at busy times.
Yes, Wendy's there often, but she's not there all Saturday and all day Sunday. So
No,
there
but-
is a lot of that, but that's generally how it goes.
Right. Chief Peters, is there going to be some way of surveying the beach to see if the mass of people on it is a safe number of people, or and who's going to do that?
Good question.
We don't have any. I mean, we would typically rely on the beach manager to inform us if there's any issues. If we were to put something in place like this, we would need some sort of beach attendants to be at that location to kind of monitor people who are on the beach. We'd have to come up with some sort of number. I have talked to other police chiefs, and the state's working on trying to give them a magic number of what their beaches could hold at a safe capacity. And I don't think we have any of those studies completed as of right now for Portsmouth Beach, but we'd have to come up with a number of people that can be on the beach safely, and rather than just eyeballing it, and kind of have that general figure.
It would be, to me, it would be a 10 by 10 spots, and you just got to label them out and mark them off by. But the problem is if it's 10 o'clock in the morning and it's high tide, if it's 10 o'clock in the morning and it's low tide, you got a lot more beach to play with. But just simply marking off areas and say, okay, you've got area B, you've got area C, there's enough space in between. The 5-person limit could be tough if there's a 6-person family. But I think we can accomplish. I have faith in our Portsmouth residents that they're going to be able to social distance themselves. But
if there's enough space for them to do it, but if more people are on the beach than can be physically, socially distanced,
I think they'll leave.
Sort of have long distance conversations. Okay, you guys got to be, after we did, you leave. We're going to stay.
No, we're going to have to limit numbers either way somehow.
Yes.
I've got a tape measure. I'll go down and start measuring 10 seconds.
Well,
and you're much
flags.
better than a 17-year-old, Keith. That's a great idea.
I mean, we could just open on Memorial Day and see how it goes, but.
Right, but if it gets out of hand and we have too many people down there who are potentially exposing each other to something nasty, who says enough? Disperse ye rebels. I mean,
I'd be more concerned about that July 4th than I would be Memorial Day. The way the weather's going, it's probably going to snow.
Yeah, true. Memorial Day might be a great practice session for us before it does get much busier.
But if you're wrong, and I hope you are, there again, if we're making plans, that should be part of a plan.
All right, folks, this is a great conversation. But I think we're all saying, I think everybody's saying the same thing. What I'm hearing is let's move forward with a plan to be open for Memorial Day weekend. At least make sure we have our plan in place and a backup plan in case something goes wrong. But we can move forward, and staff, Wendy and staff can try to come up with a plan, because we have to have something prepared so that when people get there, they're either directed to where they can go and what they can. There has to be signage. There has to be something. So we have some time. Let's see what we can come up with, and see if there's a way to make it happen for the Portsmouth residents. It sounds like we don't have to solve it tonight, but I think we've got direction in order to get people working on a plan for Memorial Day weekend. Does that sound fair?
If I could, Mr. President, I think that sounds fair. I'll just reiterate a concern that's floated around. Mr. Kelly articulated it. Lifeguards are one thing in that, in some sense, they are a first responder type of job, and if they need to be of whatever class of employee, then that's fine. But for people who would be in the parking lot, at the intake area, would be potentially interacting, even at a socially safe distance, with the general public, I think they need to be properly trained full-time Portsmouth staff.
I think part of what we need to do is have a plan that identifies how to safely do something, because I think if we can't do it safely, we're just setting ourselves up for a problem. I do have to jump, we do have a comment, so let me just make sure we can get to, I'm not taking a shot at it, so, PE, name and address? Sorry. Hello?
Did you unmute? Yeah.
They're unmuted. Hello? Not Tom.
No.
Hello? All right.
If they still want to make a comment, ask them maybe to put it into the question and answers section, if they can't
Yeah.
get unmuted.
Mr. President, I have to say thank you to Chief Peters and the staff, and I just want to emphasize that they have been thinking about this and they've been researching it, and the fact that we are today, right now, telling them to do a plan does not mean that they haven't been thinking of the plan.
No, I agree. No, I understand. I think what we need to do is kind of formulate something so that it's a little more concrete, so that we can act on the plan, and we have, we've thought through, the money situation, or how to verify what we're going to have for lifeguards, spacing. I think we just need to now regroup and make sure that, we know what we're doing for that weekend, so that everybody's prepared. Do we have enough resources? Those are the kind of things that I think now just want to, act on and make sure that we've thought of everything, so that if we do open it, we're opening it in a safe manner. And a lot of times when you get into the details of what's safe, it turns out you have a lot less room than you think. So I just, now's the time. We have a little bit of time to try to make it happen, but I think we've got some good people in the right places, and they'll come up with a way to at least be able to execute something for that weekend, so that people can go and, if the weather's nice, enjoy the beach. But we, right now we don't have the answers, but we need to start to document them and move in that direction. That's all. I think. So do we need to have a motion, or is it, it sounds like, Mr. Rayner.
I don't think we need a motion, do we?
No, but I do think we need to consider adding tools to the police department's toolbox that allows them to enforce not parking through the neighborhoods for when the beach parking lot is full.
Right.
If that's a big concern, then they need to have the tools to be able to enforce that. Because if there's not a sign that says it, then they can't enforce it.
Right, and we may need DPW to put signs up, so that the police have that leverage to go up there. And if there's signs saying no parking in the neighborhoods, and they get turned away from the beach, they know that, okay, it's not the first left up the street or the first right, they're done.
Yeah, but no parking in the neighborhood is tough, because if I'm a homeowner on Sigourney and I'm having friends over, they're going to park in the
They're gonna
street.
park on Bit Street, yeah.
So it's almost, you got to put no beach parking, but then how do you prove that you were at the beach? It's a tough situation.
Slippery slope, I understand.
Yeah.
But
PED is back
I know. Let's try to get
and gone.
Hello? Oh,
They left.
they gave up. There'll be an email coming.
No, they're still on the list, but their hand went down.
I don't know if there's a way for them to
Yeah, there it is.
Back up.
Hello?
Hi there, Trish Detlinger on 395 McCory. Can you hear me?
We got.
Hi, thank you for being patient. I got bumped. Respectfully, I just ask that serious consideration be given to the impact on McCory. We already endure repercussion from no restrictions on this beach whatsoever. So we have out of state as well as out of town. So please give consideration to if you're going to be restricting access to Portsmouth residents only, please do the same for us, because we are definitely going to get that overflow and then some, and it's already barely manageable down here.
Well, we understand, and that's something that I think was alluded to earlier, that there are other beaches in town that will probably see additional usage that normally you wouldn't see. And but again, I think as Councilor Abbott pointed out, that Sandy Point has been known as the town beach for Portsmouth, and that's the only beach that we have lifeguards and such. So Sandy Point is a little bit of a different situation, because that has been the traditional beach for most other Portsmouth residents and non-residents. But you do bring up a good point, and it is something that the town administrator and the police force have been monitoring, and not only there, but at the other beaches such as Island Park, Mount Hope Park. There's definitely people are finding opportunities to get to the water. So we're aware of it, and we are collectively doing our best to try and monitor the situation, and where needed, the police have had to get involved to break up a larger crowd. But for the most part, people have been fairly cooperative, and I think they just enjoy the ability to get out. But again, as the weather gets nicer, it's going to be tough. So we'll continue to monitor and do what we can, and we just all need to be thinking along, trying to stay a step ahead, and maybe we should be thinking steps, on some of these other issues. But for now, let's try to focus on getting a plan in place for the beach and seeing what we can do at Sandy Point.
Thank you. Please consider having it just be Portsmouth residents down at McCory as well, if you're able to do that. That would give the Portsmouth residents an opportunity to have somewhere to go, and it would make it more manageable for those of us that live on McCory. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay. I think we can move on to our next item. Mr. Hamilton.
I promise, at least I hope, I promise this will be a lot quicker. So we have our 2012-2013 bond item that is accounting-wise hanging out there and needs to be paid off. When we looked at this 4 years ago, I made the suggestion that we use surplus to pay it down. I was overvoted on the council, and there was $50,000 per year of cash put towards it, which would take us at current levels 36 years to pay it down. My proposal is that we use 50% of any audited surplus to be applied to that, to remove the deficit. That way we free up $50,000 in the budget and pay it down quicker, so that it's paid off and taken away. I understand that as of today, it doesn't necessarily hurt us, but that doesn't mean that Gatsby rules don't change. It does come back to bite us in the push. So my motion would be to, as it stated, utilize 50% of all future town audited surpluses to pay down to $1,902,252, which was what was in the audit this year. That number may be a little bit higher, a little bit lower.
Mr. President.
Mr. Jackson.
So I have a question. I need a little more background on this. I was not on the council in 2012, 2013, as were many other members of the council. I'm not fluent in the issue as Councilmember Hamilton, so I'm not quite sure how we have a bond that we can decide how much to pay for and all that. So I need to know a little bit more about what is this account that we're trying to address. You used the phrase, it doesn't hurt us. I'd like to know what are our obligations, Also, I'd like to know what a vote tonight would do, in the sense that, are we trying to tie the hands of future councils or next year's? But what would a vote tonight accomplish, other than us saying right now we like a policy, but come budget season next year, who's ever sitting on that council is free to do whatever they want? I'd like to know what a vote tonight would accomplish.
I'll answer that part, that it helps us pay off a debt we owe ourselves in an accounting basis. Rich has got reams and reams of paper of where this and how it happened, and I'll let him explain that part.
It's getting late, so I'll just keep it in. Very basically, Mr. Ketchman, and I'll forward all this to you. There was money that the school had borrowed back in 2012. It was called a warrant. We don't call them warrants anymore. That money was supposed to pay for capital improvements on the school side. That money was diverted, and it was used to pay for essentially capital on the town side. The money that was budgeted back then to pay for that capital was not used to pay that capital, so that created a deficit that's been building over the years. It was not as readily apparent when we took out the bond to pay for the police station, but as that money is drawn down, as I stated a few years ago, it would be close to a $7 million deficit. This has been recorded in every audit since 2013. And I was asked to do a study on this a number of years ago, and I'll forward that too. But Mr. Hamilton is correct. This is essentially money that we owe ourselves. The school has been drawing down on that warrant, but because the money isn't there, it just keeps creating a deficit. So eventually, we have to decide whether it's just going to stay there, which is not a prudent thing to do, or we have to move funds in there in some fashion and erase that deficit. Every audit since 2013, there's been a statement in the audit saying that the town will develop a plan to pay that debt down. And a couple of years ago, there was a motion to this almost exact same motion, if memory serves me right. But then it was changed to $50,000. So what that ends up doing is that takes $50,000 out of the general fund to pay this down every year. A more elegant way at that time that we thought would work would be to apportion a percentage of any surplus from any given year and apply that to that deficit. And that would be paid off quicker with less impact on the operations of the town. And again, I have this all laid out. I have tons of data on this, and I'll be happy to forward it to you.
If I could just follow up, that makes sense to a degree, and to a degree, I mean, I don't have materials in front of me. You have reams of them, I have none. So, but I'm following along enough to be able to ask the following question. If we take a town surplus, that's money we have in an account, and we pay it, who are we writing the check to here? Who are we paying?
Us.
We're paying it to ourselves.
So it really is strictly an accounting issue.
Yes.
Yes, but there was money that was spent on something that money wasn't borrowed for.
Yeah.
And the school, for all these years, has been paying, rightfully so. That was money that they had borrowed in a bond, and they have been drawing down on that bond amount. It's numbers on a page, but they've been drawing on that bond amount.
So for us repaying it essentially is addressing the deficit caused by the school committee doing what they rightly should thought they have been able to do.
Well, they're committed to a 5-year capital plan, so they have to adhere to that.
And
and it's, Lisa was just, this, in the financial statements, that deficit is required to be showed, which, the 3 different auditing firms have done over the years.
Right.
So every year it shows up, in the audit, it doesn't hurt our bond rating, it doesn't hurt the town, because it's money that needs to be in the front pocket, not back pocket, as was described to me a number of years ago. So it doesn't hurt the town, but
Today.
never, you don't know. I mean, Gatsby came out with a new ruling, and we have to pay, we're not allowed to.
And so my final question had to do with what would a vote tonight do? And the real heart of that question is this going to affect this year's budget, or is this going to affect what happens next year at budget?
Well, theoretically, it would never affect the budget because, we're striving every year to have, close the year out in the black. So it would take 50% of any future surpluses and apply that to, making that number smaller until.
So the council, if I understand what you're saying, Mr. Rayner, correctly, the council would never see that as an agenda item going forward. It would simply happen that if there is surplus, it would be applied to that account in this proportion.
Right, and that would be reported to the auditors, and then it would be reflected in the following year's audit statements.
Thank you.
Oh, hold on one second, Lenny. Lenny, you all set?
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Jukusa?
Just wanted to confirm that Mr. Rayner and the staff believe that this proposal by Mr. Hamilton should be approved. Isn't that right?
Yes, I've lost track of the number of years, but when this first came up, that was our recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a question. If is this a safe thing to do this year to encumber 50% of the surplus to filling in this hole in our own budget? And what does that do to the emergency fund that you proposed and put into the budget?
Two different things. One, it wouldn't affect this budget because we don't know if we'll have a surplus until next year, this time. One, and then two, that contingency fund is money that you're putting into an account to be used if an emergency comes up. And at the end of that year, if that money is not spent, that becomes part of the surplus, and normally it would get swept into the general fund.
Okay.
Or into the fund balance, instead of fund balance.
All right, so if we take this year as for instance, and take out of what's happening to the budget this year, there was a $922,000 surplus, 80,000 we put towards Prudence Island, so that leaves us about 840,000. 420 would have gone to pay down this debt. So it doesn't have an effect on the operating budget. It's what is left over as a surplus. So if at the end of this year we have $10 in the black, $5 goes to pay this down. But it's not $50,000 that's being utilized in the budget every year that stops us from buying a police car or stops us from, any number of things.
All right. Any more questions? Any further questions? There's nothing. So we have a motion. We don't have
a second yet.
I'll
second.
We have 2 seconds. So Mr. Katzman, he had his hand up. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
And Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Okay, on to number 5. The next item, it's request council approval of auditor selection for follow-on submission to the Auditor General for state approval to contract selected auditing firm.
Mr. President, Council. Portsmouth received on March 4th, we received the Rhode Island Auditor General's approval to issue audit certification. Those bids were received and evaluated in accordance with the Auditor General Rhode Island guidelines for audit bids and specifications for municipalities. On the cover sheet, all supported by the backup behind that, you can see that we received bids from Haig, Sahadi and Company, Bloom, Shapiro, and Baxter, Dancero, and Associates. In accordance with the Auditor General's guidelines, they were evaluated by the Finance Director, the Deputy Finance Director, and the School Finance Director, and you can see the scores. Heg Sahadi scored 1 out of 3 with a total bid package of $174,900. Bloom Shapiro was 17 points behind, and Baxter, Dancero and Associates scored at 257, 30 points lower than Heg Sahadi. So I recommend contracting with Heg Sahadi and Company as our auditing firm for fiscal years 20, 21, and 22. And then your approval allows us to send this recommendation to the Auditor General. This Auditor General RFPs are very unique. You have to get Auditor General approval before you issue the RFP. And then once you've made a selection, you would have to get the Auditor General's approval to final approve your selection. So we're asking for you to approve our recommendation and allow us to send this recommendation to the Auditor General for his approval.
Mr. President, I move that we contract with Heg Sahadi Company to be our auditors for fiscal years 20, 21, and 22.
Len Katzman, second.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. On to the last item on new business number 6. It's a request to amend ordinance 99-6-28, an ordinance relating to adjustment of tax exemptions in years of townwide real property revaluation.
Yeah, he's.
Oh, he's under attendees.
No, he's not, but he's on the phone.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I will make a motion that we would approve the proposed amendment as presented.
Second, Keith Hamilton.
All those in favor?
Ms. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. On to correspondence.
I move that, Mr. President, I move that we receive and place on file a correspondence.
Second for discussion. I'd like to see those, the items from North Smithfield and Smithfield to be taken off and be voted on at our next meeting. Specifically in terms of maintaining funding for our school department. Even though it's only $4 million, it's still $4 million, and I'd hate to see the state cut that funding to our school departments. So items
4 and 5.
2, 3, and 4.
And 5.
Yeah, well, 4 and 5 are the same, aren't they?
Yeah, just.
Yeah, 4 and 5 are the same.
Yeah, just different.
Okay, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Please. And I'd like to thank Mr. Freeman for a very nice letter. Number 6 there was very nice.
Yes.
He's got great penmanship for a kindergartner.
That's true. He'll never be a doctor, I'm afraid.
We need a second.
We have it, Dr. Ryan and Mr. Hamilton.
All those in favor?
Mr. Jukusa?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Katzman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passed 7-0. On to future meetings. I think we said enough tonight. Our next meeting will be on May 26th, which is the Tuesday after the Memorial Day beach opening.
Should we consider a placeholder for any applications for outside dining that may come in the next 7 days? So we think about the possibility of a meeting sometime in the middle of next week.
I think we should have some contingency set up so that we can make that decision, yeah.
I could do, you want to try the middle of the week, the Wednesday?
I think that gives the town clerk the most flexibility to see what comes in by Friday.
What's that,
Can we do Wednesday?
The 20th?
the 20th?
That's doable.
I think we should just put it there as a placeholder.
Sure.
So that gives restaurants enough time to make a decision if they're going to try and put something together in the next 4 or 5 days, depending on the governor's guidance. I'd hate to see us hamstring any businesses that might want to try and do something.
Right.
Just by the mere
Especially
fact that we don't have a meeting.
So we'd have a May 20th meeting, May 26th.
May 20th only if needed. If nobody brings in applications, then we don't need it.
Right, there's nothing to vote on then.
Right. May 20th if needed, which then we'd have, again, May 26th, June 8th, June 10th, and June 24th. Yeah,
And June 10th is the public hearing.
June 10th is a public hearing, yes, and that's also on a Wednesday. Okay.
Motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn and go into executive session.
executive session.
Second. Should we recite under?
Rhode Island General Law 4246 5A2 collective bargaining.
Thank you.
So, what's that?
But,
Yeah. Well,
teachers has to-
yeah, so we have a
They just
motion.
had to vote.
We have a second?
Yep, got it.
All in favor?
Ms. Fujikusa?
And before everyone goes, thank you to the staff and all our volunteers for dealing with this COVID-19 crisis. It's just so impressive. Thank you.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Couchman?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Dr. Ryan?
Aye.
Aguirre?
Aye. Motion passes 7-0. We are into executive session. Let's just make sure we're